that you might see or possibly not, that you're committing to anything, of things that we've done to possibly reduce or mitigate the impact of ground level noise from aircraft.
So actually, Fan is my support manager for procedures at Northern California TradeCon. So she's not talking to the airplanes and clearing the airplanes as far as what creates noise and how you can reduce noise. She's also not an expert in noise. And I think we need to make that very clear that she has worked with in simulations, she's worked with pilot groups, she's worked with flight standards and flight procedures to develop procedures, but she's not an expert on flying those airplanes. She's not an expert on what creates noise, other than what we know as lay people. Flaps hanging out, extra speed, trying to stabilize the aircraft, no more than any of that. So I don't want to place her in a position where you're expecting from them those specific, that specific information about what creates noise and how it can be reduced.
Well, acknowledged, but I'll go ahead and, I did have an expectation that somebody was going to be able to be here from the FAA and let me finish my statement.
I kept waiting from the airport.
Let me finish my statement.
No, I kept waiting from the airport to get information about who you wanted, and I never did receive anything,
So I'm just going to say, in the meeting last time, we talked about being able to have somebody from the FAA, from whatever department it is that you guys are divided into, they could go ahead and share with us what was happening as it relates to FAA procedures and how they were translated into the cockpit. We talked about that in the meeting last week. So this is nothing about San Jose giving communication to you.
Okay, you're getting angry here. And
I am.
Well,
You didn't let me finish my statement in the
leave, sir.
first
We
place.
can leave if you'd like. But in the meeting, San Jose Airport also told you, John Akern got up and said, give us the information on what you would like, and I will make sure that I go to the regional administrator to get somebody from that line of business to be here. That's what was told to the entire group. And your minutes will prove that out when Mr. Akern was at the podium and gave you that information. Nothing, we kept waiting, and nothing came from Matthew to us about who you wanted. I even checked back with Matthew, do we have anything? Because we were getting down to the last minute and still had not received anything from this group here about who they wanted, what specific information after you were asked for that.
You don't believe in our meeting, we talked about having somebody from the FAA. Was this the whole procedure discussion you had about the different departments within the FAA?
Sir, I was here as an air traffic controller to represent that aspect of the FAA. I made that very clear in my presentation to you. There are multiple lines of business within the FAA that I have no contact with, none whatsoever. The regional administrator was offered up to you to be the point of contact on other items that you would like to have discussed. And I took that as, when John Akern gave you that information, that you were going to provide information to him so that he could coordinate with the regional administrator on other.
Okay, let's set this aside. We have Dan here today. Let's go ahead and we'll talk about this. Dan, you want to respond to anything of what my initial question was before we go around the table here, acknowledging you're not a noise expert.
So I can say, you did kind of ask what determines what an airplane flies. And in air traffic, so part of that is going to be weather, but ultimately, and we may only offer a few things. Based on weather, we may say you can fly this procedure or you can fly this procedure. There will be a selection of procedures that you can fly during certain weather phenomena. But the pilot will pick which one of those. Air traffic control doesn't pick. We will solicit and we'll say we're running the ILS, we're running RNAV approaches, but the pilot comes over and he says, I want this approach. And we will never combat that because we don't know the pilot training, we don't know the aircraft capabilities. There's aircraft certifications to fly procedures, there's pilot certifications to fly procedures. So air traffic's role is not to tell a pilot what they can and cannot fly. We do know that we have limitations. You have to fly one of these to get in today. When it's VFR out, when it's clear, we will often solicit a visual approach. We do that because our separation standards are less. We can, and it's easier for controllers and pilots American pilots, the US pilots, do tend to like charted visual approaches and charted visual approaches. International pilots, visual approaches are not very common internationally, and most international pilots don't typically like them. Even if we clear an aircraft for a visual approach, some aircraft carriers and some even corporate pilots will have restrictions within their own company that say, even if you're cleared for a visual approach, we want you to fly an instrument flight pattern. Because they want, and I think that the study that was mentioned bared that out, they want the airplane to fly these approaches because it is safer. It is safer to have the airplane fly than have the pilot fly more. And that's just one of the realities as these aircraft have gotten so complicated and so complex that they would prefer to have the computer fly it, and a lot of commercial airlines mandate that, if possible. And sometimes it isn't possible. Sometimes the location of where we're clearing them will dictate whether or not they have to hand fly it or not. But often they do want to intercept and they want the airplane to fly it for them. So air traffic doesn't typically do that. Our expectation is we tell them pretty far out. Pretty far out from the airport, we're telling them we need to know what they want so that we can set them up to be successful for that. But that's really our role in how they fly. Okay, and what the...
Before you go to start,
Sure.
how many different procedures exist for south flow arrival?
Let me actually look. I think off the top of my head I want to say 3 or 4, but I have the book here. We can look it up. Yeah. ILS. So, oh yeah, you count visuals. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are really the same. Yeah, so, because you have a right and a left runway, those are separate. They're really, we have procedures, individual procedures, one to the right runway, one to the left runway, but they basically, but for your intents and purposes, are pretty much the same. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the visual. So there will be, for the south flow, there will be 5.
And just to be clear, what you're saying, I kind of heard ILS, GTS. Could you just tell us what, what
sure.
those are labeled so we'll have
Yes,
that?
absolutely. ILS or localizer, runway 12 right. RNAV, RNP, Zulu, runway 12 left.
I'm sorry, I can't hear what you're saying. What you do specific on 12 right? And would you repeat, please? This is Mary Ann. Sorry.
So ILS or localizer, runway 12, 12 right. RNAV, RNP, Z, we call it Zulu, RNP, Z, runway 12 left. RNP, Zulu, runway 12 right. RNAV, GPS, Y, Yankee, runway 12 left. RNAV, GPS, Yankee, runway 12 right, and the visual approach.
And the visual same for left and right.
Yes.
And then, so then you were going to talk about STAR.
So what is the exact, what's the question about the STAR? Sorry, are you just...
Gary, go ahead.
You made some changes in your different approaches. And so the question is, what is the difference? Why were they driven and so forth? That's the first half. But the other half is, what are your changes based on? I realize that procedures evolve, but is it by chance reduced separation requirements, or what's driving these things? Because this reverse flow seems to move further and further west over the last several years than what it was, and we don't understand it.
Okay, so I'll talk about the STARS and that change. So the FAA was mandated by Congress to get away from ground-based navigation. And that is actually what started a lot of this, and that mandate's been out for a while. but we needed to, the cost of maintaining ground-based navigation started skyrocketing. The FAA took a lot of heat for not being in the 21st century. We needed next gen, and next gen is all satellite-based. So the arrivals, the stars, and those are the, when we're talking higher up, so I'll just start at the higher altitudes, those are stars, they're terminal arrival routes, and those changed because we went from, those used to be ground-based, they were based on the San Jose VOR and other ground-based equipment, and they went to satellite-based, and at the same time, the FAA tried to make them quieter and more efficient. Quieter wasn't really our mandate, it was never really part of the design, but industry knew that they needed to be good neighbors, and so actually what industry brought to the table is if they could do idle descents, they would have multiple gains. They would save a lot of money, they would save green gas emissions, and they would become better neighbors because they would be quieter. So when we designed the stars, that was our goal, to use satellite-based navigation and have the airplane be able to descend in an idle for as far as he could. Now, it was never intended that that airplane would idle to the runway, and that, however, that is an expectation that the public has, but the reality of it is once you get below a certain altitude, the airspace is too congested. And yes, we can do that on occasion. When you are the only person out there and there is no other traffic, we absolutely can let you idle to the runway. But the reality is this airspace is very congested. So that most of those gains are happening at high altitude, which is where you're not realizing much gain from that. The airlines are, because they're saving a lot of fuel. And we let them do it as far as we can. And that's always going to be dynamic. It's always going to be based on who else is out there at the time. So that was the start. They changed to satellite-based. Then that same thing happened at the lower altitudes. And it became, okay, we need to do the same thing. We need to get some satellite-based, GPS-based, that's what RNAV is just GPS-based instrument approaches. And what set them up and what moved them, and can they be moved? I can't answer that. I think that if you were to pose a proposal to move it back, we could definitely look at it. There is criteria, and the criteria comes from the division of FAA called Flight Standards, and it's all based on current aircraft, the model aircraft that are out there now, and how they fly safely. So, for example, if an altitude had to change over a fix, if it had to go up or down, that is actually all as we design stuff, we send it to flight simulators. So Boeing flight simulates it for us, United flight simulates, the FAA has its own flight simulation. And we put it through these flight simulations with multiple wind conditions, and we see what the safe altitude is. What causes the bulk of aircraft, and we do run a whole bunch of aircraft, and they have to run like 22,000 runs in the simulation, and they see what is the most stable altitude, what causes the safest glide path to get down, and that determines where those things come from. A lot of times too, so let's say, well, it shifted west. A lot of that has to do with, well, what is the radius? So what are the approach speeds on the airplanes? And the approach speeds are part of what the aircraft needs, not what air traffic needs. We don't care about any speed. That's based, again, on aircraft design, and they have gotten faster, or they glide, so they're harder to slow down, and they do glide. But some of that increased speed, you just know from general physics, creates a bigger arc. So that could account, and I don't know this for a fact, so don't quote me that that is what happened, but that could account for some of that arc. And it just comes into the criteria when we build this. Okay, they've got to slow down, they've got to be a safe altitude, and all that gets built in. Now, we weren't trying, we also know that we do have environmental laws, that when we develop procedures, we do have environmental things we have to look at. We can't shift it too much. At the time, it fit into the criteria for the environmental law. Criteria changes, the FAA is willing to look at things that need to be looked at, but that's partly how that comes about. Did that answer your question?
Kind of. The only real question I have is, why didn't you make some sort of an attempt to keep the original flight routes the same? Because it's a coordinate it's not a requirement to move it. So I don't understand why that wasn't done.
If an aircraft is on the same route and he's closer to the runway and there is no physical way for them to make a safe arc, it would naturally push it back out.
That's it.
That would be the only real reason, because we did actually attempt to put them in the same spot. That is always part of our intent. We actually, when we design, we bring in track data, historical track data. Now, historical track data is why? Because it was always controllers. Controllers were trying to put them in the same spot, and you just have too many different controllers and too many different techniques, and pilots were hand flying. So when we say we did put them in the same spot, we can probably show you that yes, this path that you're saying is a mile away is in that spot. We also try to protect our own requirements because we do have separation from the runway. If I have an aircraft taking off, I can't be any closer. The downwind, the aircraft landing, have to be at least 3 miles. So we know we can't get closer to the runway. We can get further away from the runway, but we can't get closer because I have to have 3 miles laterally from the guy on the runway and the guy in the air, if that. But could we look at those tracks? Those are questions that you could forward up and we could look at.
Some of the other questions they had was the 210 knots, and you had mentioned to me about the type aircraft.
Correct, yeah. So it did go, some of the speeds did go up, and again, that is based on the approach speeds of the aircraft that fly into the airport. And Southwest was a big player in developing these procedures. They came to the table, they were there every day. They know what kind of aircraft they were going to start flying in, because we started developing these in 2010. They were published in 2011. Southwest knew at that time what their goals were for this airport and what they saw that their fleet mix would be. And the aircraft that they were flying in needed a higher approach speed. So if it is a maximum speed, so it isn't a speed that every airplane flies. It's only if you need it. They still have to fly at their safe approach speed. But now they have aircraft, they have the 900 series, 737-900 series that now needs to fly faster to land. So Southwest, knowing what kind of aircraft they want to fly in and out of this airport, helped set that criteria.
So if the safe speed for a 737-700 series was 180, they're still flying at 180.
Yes.
There's no need to fly at 210.
Correct, in fact, they can't.
So we have multiple airplanes, types of airplanes, fleet mix-wise, that are flying at different speeds into this airport.
That speed is also actually kind of controversial. It is a max speed, and there are only a few aircraft that actually need to fly that, but it's actually a CFR. Pilots can't exceed 200 over that fix because they are beneath class Bravo right there. And the max speed underneath Bravo is 200 knots. So they're violating the CFRs if they fly faster.
Isn't that another change that's coming?
No,
Isn't that, okay.
that one is not. Just because we did try to lower it to 200, but it excludes aircraft, and industry said you're excluding, we can't now fly into San Jose.
So now there was also a question about the altitude hitter, right?
The altitude did go up a little bit at Hitter because Hitter moved southeast. It did go up and move southeast. That is a criteria that came from those stars that I was talking about. When we changed the stars and made them RNAV and GPS based, we had to build the procedures so that a computer could fly it instead of a person. And a computer couldn't differentiate between having a speed on a speed and altitude of an approach and a speed and altitude on where the star ended. So the arrival would come in and would end, and in order for the computer to be able to fly that, those two had to match, that we had to sync them up. And so we ended up pushing the Hitter out, and the altitude got raised a bit so that the two would meet and the computer could fly it. That's why it got changed. Could it be changed again? Again, if you ask for us to relook at what we could do, it does. We have to look at every piece of it. You have to start all the way when they're at flight level 300, when they're at 30,000 feet. That's actually when they're programming this in. At 30,000 feet, they're programming everything to the runway. So we have to make sure the computer flies it correctly all the way down.
Now, when I talked to you about Hitter before, you said because it was backed up and further away, by the time they crossed the original Hitter location, they were still at the same altitudes that they were previously.
Yeah, so it got higher because it moved further back. And if you just use a regular, if you look at the math, if you've got an angle that's going down, if I'm right here, I'm going to be at this altitude, and as I go back, I'm getting higher. So it was moved back on the glide path that the airplane were flying. However, like you've seen, they are flying more precise path now. They definitely are.
Is there any plan to add horizontal diversity to some of these routes? In the previous, you said it, hand flying, right? And no one's going to hit that track exactly right. That's pretty well done. And that gave us a spatial diversity horizontal, which means that the impact on the ground is substantially less as opposed to a railroad track we have now. Is there any plan now or in the future to add some diversity, horizontal diversity to these routes so that we can perhaps reduce the net impact to an individual on the ground?
So the equipment is capable of that. That technology already does exist. For example, because GPS is so accurate, because our nav is so accurate, when we have aircraft right now that are out over the ocean and we aren't watching them, we can't monitor them because they're in non-radar, and they're flying these GPS routes, they have actual built-in offset. Because if someone were at the wrong altitude, and I'm flying this way, and I misheard the altitude air traffic assigned me, and they don't have me on radar, so they can't verify that I'm at it, and I am at this altitude, GPS is accurate enough that those airplanes will hit. So they build in offset for that. So the technology exists for what you're asking. However, doing that at a very low level, the closer we get to the ground, the more precise we need to be. And building it as in we have different procedures, that one side it's over here and one side it's over here, that's very difficult. I'm not going to say impossible, but you have to know that every procedure affects every other procedure. And so we would have to develop a system where on Tuesdays we're flying this because it's going to impact San Francisco departures, Oakland departures, San Carlos departures, Palo Alto departures. Everything affects everything. So it's a difficult chore.
I do understand, and thank you. This has been one of the best responses that I've heard in a year and a half. Thank you.
Okay, so we were going to go around the table, but we started with Gary, so we're going to start over here with Kathy, if you want to go ahead.
I'm going to pass it along.
Okay. Lee?
Actually, so I wanted to ask, do you guys agree with the statement that Mr. Holbrook made in terms of, that there is a track shift, there is speeds that have changed and so forth? I just kind of want to know if we're in agreement on that at least.
I think Ed pretty much
So
spoke to all
basically,
of
yes.
those issues.
I can't say that I know that it moved a mile further west. I think that's what his report said. We would actually have to verify that. It's going to be hard because, like I said, I can look at data and I see, we can pull in a year's worth of data and it's this wide, and my track looks pretty dead down the middle. So I don't know I don't know that I would agree with the statement that it did move a mile west of where the most.
So I think what she's saying is that, so the swath of airplanes previously may have been 3 or 4 miles wide. So where the on the rail is now is still within that swath of airplanes.
And so when you say the majority, I'd have to look and validate that. But I do agree that, yes, absolutely, it's a rail now, and that rail may be further west than the community would like. Absolutely.
Can we ask for, for the examination and the investigation, just so that we can put that to rest?
Let's put that on the list and we'll see what we're going to actually ask for.
Okay. Another question is, if you can help me understand why the San Jose South Road goes all the way to North Palo Alto, and not all of them do that, but then why does it go all the way that far off? And when is the decision made to go that far north?
So most of the ones that go that far north are non-GPS aircraft. They are aircraft that are flying the ILS. And air traffic has a requirement, because the ILS and the technology of ILS, it has what's called, I don't want to make this technical, but it has a final approach gate that typically is 5 miles out. And I then, as a controller, have to get the airplane established on the beam that's being generated from the ground. It's generating a beam, and the aircraft has to be able to intercept that, and it has to be at least 2 miles, normally 3 miles from this approach gate. So I have to, if I can't do the RNAV, I can't turn in tight, because now controllers have to take the aircraft out and get them far enough out that they can lock into that beam far enough out to ensure that they will land safely. That it's an older technology, but a lot of aircraft, it is still very, very precise. It is even still more precise than our current, most of our RNAVs. RNAV GPS, it is still more precise than that. So, and a lot of aircraft, depending on the weather, if the visibility is very low, even the RNAV aircraft are going to want to do that. But most of the time they can do the GPS approach. But those ILS aircraft have to be taken out. The other reason, so that's one reason. Another reason that we can be doing it is that we have a slower airplane in front. And so I have a guy, and I've cleared him, but he's not traveling very fast, and this guy back here is. I now have to give myself more room, or he's going to overtake him. So that's another reason. We also have, the tower may call us, and they may have a whole line of aircraft that they're trying to get it out. They're getting delays, and they need us to build a hole. And we will take an aircraft further north to give them time to pump some off and get them off the runway. So those are some reasons why we do that.
Thank you.
If you remember last time we met, I mentioned the fact that there's a lot of times they're out the vector to keep the sequence between airplanes. So unfortunately, we have requirements of, well, not unfortunately, it's a fortunate thing. We have requirements of keeping airplanes 3 miles apart and or 4, depending on the type. Could be even more than that. So.
The category, depending on the approach procedure, is, as she mentioned, the weather. So different procedures have different weather criteria, so if the ceiling drops, that's why more of them may take the ILS, because the ceiling and visibility restricts them from flying the other procedures. They just can't, they wouldn't be able to get in.
And that changes with aircraft type. So we, just throw more complication on it.
Yeah.
The more sophisticated the airplane, they can do it in worse conditions. So, because they have more onboard avionics that make procedures safer for them. So there is no real quick and simple answer. I am trying to make it as concise as I can.
Laws, I was wondering, which environmental laws are those?
So, like I said, I'm not an environmental specialist. I know that the order the FAA, the big order that the FAA uses is the 1050.1. So it's, and it's based off of NEPA law. And so but we have environmental specialists. So as we design something, it leaves air traffic. Air traffic, of course, asks for the things that are best for us, and we do know that aircraft down low, we can't move them, so we try to keep them where they've been. But we send that off and then to the environmental office. So the FAA has environmental specialists, environmental lawyers, and they do evaluations. They have computer systems that do evaluations. They look at the type of aircraft that will be flying this. They look at the number of aircraft that will be flying it, and then they will report back to us if that works or if we have to modify it. So,
Okay. How often are the flight management system databases updated?
every 28 days, they actually can be updated more often than that. But there are interim chart dates, there are chart dates which are every 56 days, and there are interim chart dates which are every 28 days. We try to do less significant changes on interim chart dates. And then the companies, depending, there's a lot of companies that have FMS databases. Jeppesen is probably one of the largest, but Honeywell, and they can push out non-critical changes in between. But the FAA will not, it will not publish something in between. So 28 days is the soonest that.
But 56 is the most.
56 days is our standard chart date, yeah.
Okay. And are HIMR and ZORSA in the flight management systems
Yes.
now?
Yes, there.
Mr. Holbrook mentioned that there's one theory that says if planes are being flown by a pilot, it might be quieter than planes that are flown by the flight management system. How do we get our arms around that to figure out if that's true or not? Do you have any direction you can point us in or data that can help us?
You know, I think God, I don't even know, because even a noise specialist probably wouldn't have that information, because I've listened to the noise specialists that specialize in some of the other forums that are out there, the roundtable and what have you. But they're not pilots, and I'm not sure that they are specialists in how the noise is created by the airplane. They just measure the noise and explain the noise. But so I don't know. I guess that would be a physics question. That
Yeah, and
definitely not one I can answer.
I know that when we take aircraft off of the aircraft flying it, but typically we're doing that for a reason, but typically when we cause noise. So most of the time when the pilots, in our environment, most of the time when the pilots are flying it, the aircraft are going to be noisier. But that isn't a result because the pilot's flying it. It's a result because I had to level you off. I have someone, air traffic, there's another airplane out there, so I have to level you off. For an airplane to fly level, you start to get that, So when pilots are intervening these days, I would probably almost say the opposite, but not for the same reason. He still could be right. I really have no idea.
Outside of our area of specialty, and that's the only reason I just didn't want to touch that, because we don't have that knowledge. And I frankly don't know who does within our organization.
Or would you be able to find out somewhere in your organization to find out in your modeling and the simulations that are run, do they take that parameter into account? Is that information you'd be able to find out about the modeling, and do
It
they
might
look
be
at
in
that?
the simulation program themselves, maybe they put that into it.
We
but
can
I don't-
ask, what's in the simulation, if anything like that's in the parameters. Well, Flight Standards
Flight
actually
Standards.
does our simulation, does do some of our simulations, so they would know.
They would be able to get closer to that answer.
Okay, well, that goes on the list of something.
Yeah. I was wondering if any of you had a chance to read Mr. Holbrook's paper.
We did,
And I guess I'm wondering, maybe this is also the question you were getting at, but I'd love to have you speak to it, either at this meeting or a written response, or, you're off on this, or take a look at this, and kind of help guide us through this incredibly complex issue.
Well, again, there's so many areas in there that, you're asking in one entity of the FAA, unless you want it spread amongst the entire FAA for everybody to look at their different pieces, which I guess you could send it up to the regional administrator and say, hey, could you have all these people look at it? Again, we don't have a cast of thousands here, we handle and manage the air traffic control facilities within the Northern California area. Tanya and I manage those. Dan is a manager at one of our facilities, our radar facility in Sacramento. But there are so many different, she mentioned the environmental attorney, she mentioned flight standards, flight procedures. There's so many different offices that have so many different things that are so far removed from an air traffic controller and what we do and how we get an airplane from point A to point B. And so I think that would have to be something coordinated through the airport, and they could work with the regional administrator.
Now, ideally, narrowing the questions down would be a more ideal, easier way to process the stuff. A report like that is, they gave a presentation that was not necessarily dissimilar to some of the information that was contained within Mr. Holbrook's paper. But again, this is where, when you guys ask the questions, if you narrow them down rather than making them so broad, it would help try and get you a clearer answer to what you're seeking,
Okay.
just as a
I think we can do that. I also sent in a list of questions. And I'm wondering if there was anything in there that
It's flag, it's mostly data requests. Will we be able to get the data we were asking? I'm not sure who I'm asking.
So I'm looking at your list of questions right here, and most of them start with does SJC, San Jose,
I
San
think it was
Jose,
divided
San
into two
Jose.
buckets.
San Jose.
Yeah.
Most of them say San Jose. You did have one question that says, can we obtain NMOS and/or flight track data from 2 South Flow days prior to next gen implementation and 2 days after next gen? I think that's an FAA question.
So, because I was in a hurry to get here from work, I'll be bringing my questions. At least that set of questions. Because I think the first part, I thought they were, it's all about San Jose Airport, but not necessarily San Jose Airport would have the questions, or the answers, sorry. But anyway, I'd love to find out if it's
So
possible.
we can try and schedule something where we sit down with our operations people, Mayor Hendricks and yourself, to try and get at the information that you're requesting. And some of it, again, we need to remember, we need to keep it narrowly based on South Flow areas and trying to make that information helpful. You had a lot of data that was requested, and we didn't want to overwhelm and give you, basically, all the chatter between air traffic control and the planes. I mean, things like that might not be helpful, and they just may generate additional noise for you. So, that's where we need to narrow this stuff down a little bit. So.
Okay.
And to your other question, again, the FAA in their presentation did provide a pre-next gen and post-next gen sort of flight patterns as they see it.
Yep.
So if there's something specific within that question that you're seeking from them, that would be an appropriate question to ask. Again, trying to hone in what the difference is between the two. I think that's what you're trying to get at. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to understand the question.
Yes, absolutely, that's what we're trying to get at. A lot of the questions I had, you've done a great job of addressing, and I'm not sure we have to get the information that we're looking for. Oh, I know, I'd asked about GBAS last time, and the answer was that was about helping planes get the most efficient use of the...
Maybe I missed messed up my acronyms.
Okay.
So actually, at another roundtable for SFO, they talked about GBAS, and it sounded kind of different, so.
We have tested GBAS, we have done some flight testing at GBAS at San Fran, and we are in the process of developing some GBAS procedures.
Can you explain to the rest
So
of what GBAS
GBAS is global, it's GPS-based approaches. So it's a little bit different than RNAV in that it has ground-based GPS. So it has transponders and receivers that actually sit on the airport, and they are programmable. So it has a lot of possibilities. It's expensive, and San Fran is willing to invest in it. It does have possibilities because it can do things like move the threshold dynamically. So let's say if the threshold, if the runway were to get further away, the end of the runway, I would need to be higher to get there. And so GBAS has the ability to tell the airplane that the runway really starts right here, not back here. And it has the ability to tell the airplane, you can fly steeper safely. But it knows all the electronics in the airplane, and it knows the stresses of the wings. But it does have the ability to increase the descent angle, which today the procedures we use, we have to get a waiver. If we go above a 3.2, we have to get a waiver because that's a stress to the aircraft that the FAA has to waive and get approval for. 3.2 degrees, I'm sorry, 3.2 degrees. But GBAS has the ability to really increase that because it does have the technology to talk to the airplane. So the airplanes all new airplanes are coming out with the 737 MAX. All the new airplanes are coming out with the ability to have GBAS in them. So as the fleet gets newer also, this makes that more attractive. But yes, so I don't know if San Jose has any plans for GBAS. I know it'll be very interesting to watch how it plays out in San Francisco. We did test some flights in there, and now we're developing procedures.
So I apologize because I have my
no problem.
acronyms mixed up.
It is unique for the type of airplane in terms of
the rate of descent, right? Or the steepness of the descent?
Not necessarily. When we, it could be, but we probably wouldn't want to go that route. We could probably build in windows like we do where you build in a window. This is the maximum we're going to do because we know this is the maximum airplanes can do, and this is the minimum that we're going to do. So we want a minimum, let's say, of 4 degrees. Let's say we just say 4 degrees gives the communities underneath the flight path some relief, and we find that's good. So yeah, and we know that all these are, so we would publish maybe a window that they could do. You don't, not all of them are equipped, obviously. Our older aircraft aren't equipped, and you don't want to get yourself into where you don't know what altitude an airplane's going to really be at also. Because you do know you got airplanes climbing out above them. So we will have to, it's never going to be a great big window. We're not going to have 10 degrees, but a few degrees, yes. And but most of the new aircraft also are all going to be able to meet new. I think around the nation, the steeper glide paths are being requested. And so I think that's part of the incentive of even developing this. So I do think we are going to see some improvement. It's the same with quieter aircraft. I do know that's way outside the scope of us and we can't answer to it, but there is a lot of very exciting and positive things coming with quieter aircraft. The 787, Boeing 787, that has the ability to run on a fuel cell, and they're starting to test that. And if we could get aircraft landing and departing on electric instead of, the jet engine motors, that's a big deal. And those are things that we all want to work toward.
Unfortunately, we have a unique situation in the Bay Area that may be only rivaled or exceeded by New York, in the fact that we have 3 air carrier airports in such close proximity. You think about an LAX, for example, there's no other competing airports really within that airspace. Santa Monica is such a small little VFR airport, that's the only real competition they have for airspace in and around. So when they create routes, when they create the different new GPS routes into and out of there, they actually have created flight idle descent into LAX because they don't have the competing routes for the airports in close proximity. New York, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark are very similar in size and scope and distance from each other like we are. And I mean, and their requirements are so strict going in and out of those airports because of those competing flows and because of the mountainous terrain of buildings in and around there as well. So at least we have that where we've capped the height of the buildings around here, so that's not one of our competing factors, but we do have the hills around us which complicate our issues as well. So it's a unique situation that is not really needed to be dealt with by many other airports across the country when you start to even think about all the large airports that we have and the commercial air carrier airports in and around the U.S. So it's a difficult scenario and situation to deal with.
Thanks.
Both of you, and also thank you so much for listening to us as well, coming here. Really appreciate it. I really wonder at the end of what we're doing here, we're trying to solve a problem, right? And it might be the actual perceived impact in certain areas of where we live, and depending where you live, you have the impact or you don't. If we shift something, someone else might get impacted. There's just houses everywhere nowadays. I live in Morgan Hill, south of the Yakas Valley. I don't hear anything. I have neighbors half a mile further up the hill. They complain all the time about noise. And we probably don't have any of the problems felt as badly as some of the others that are here. But it's very much a perception, right? And I really wonder, is it caused? I'm looking for a root cause and hopefully a solution that can maybe mitigate some of it. But is it really caused by, well, be careful what you're asking for, right? Many of us in the South County, Gilroy, San Joaquin, North Mill, we're very happy to have San Jose as an airport so that we don't have to go to San Francisco. And many others probably in the area would say the same. So do you think that some, or could you imagine that some of the issues that we're now discussing, and I have no intention to understand every freaking rule that you were trying to understand, trying to bring common sense here. Do you think it's just because we have more flights coming into San Jose? Is it because we have more airlines coming into San Jose? And that then just changes the whole picture, that we then have people saying, well, you have so much more complaints. But common sense to me says, well, yeah, we have more flights.
It's part of it, it's definitely part of it, and, but the other part is, as we have mentioned before, it is the newer technology, it is the way airplanes are routed, getting from high altitude all the way down and flying on that rail coming in. So, where we were dispersed before, because it was all being hand-flown, basically, we are now allowing the navigation systems on the airplanes to safely get from the fixes all the way to the final gate on for the threshold for the airport. And it's just bound to happen. As I mentioned in our last meeting, it's going backwards is not really an option for us when we were A, mandated, and B, the equipment that was once there, we can't go backwards. You know, technology on board the airplanes, the technology that the FAA is using, all of these things has taken a step forward. You can't go down to Best Buy and get a 36-inch Sony picture tube anymore. They just don't sell them. So to try to go backwards would be is next to impossible at this point. And they don't. So I think the answers are what Dan had mentioned about technology on the airplane, landing on electricity, fuel cells, different types of equipment that we're going to eventually get to allow some of these aircraft to be much, much quieter than they already are. Even though we are light years ahead of where we were when I started in this organization, and the 727s that were flying in and around. I mean, those were very noisy, and they're all gone. You know, those airplanes were mandated to be put on the shelf, and they're gone. So the government is very aware and has put restrictions on the manufacturers on reducing the noise of airplanes, but some of it is just inevitable at this point in stage in our evolution.
And I know, you mentioned you're not a noise specialist, but I'm sure there's a way to get some data that probably over the past 10 years or so, well, we have that many more flights because and causing that much more noise, or maybe not, right? Because I agree with you, the technology keeps changing, and I think the main focus has to be, we're not going to have fewer people living here, right? But if we have airplanes that don't make noise, no one is going to worry about it anymore.
I think that the increase too, when you start to look at the increase, and I do think that this probably impacts your perception or the community's perception, is it isn't just San Jose that has gotten busier. The other airports around San Jose have also gotten busier, and so it seems like we don't need a break. Because if they're not flying into San Jose, they're flying into San Carlos, or they're flying into Palo Alto, and so I can see that just as a whole. But that data is available, so absolutely that data is available.
So I look forward as well to us shifting more to what is it that we actually can do versus trying to understand everything you already do. Thank you.
Everything you all have said, I just want to know how we can get that's going over Councilmember Chappie Jones' district instead of mine. They ought to be great. No, I got the regular flow, not the south flow. I got the everyday flow. Anyway, thank you. I've actually learned a lot today, and I really appreciate all the explanations. I mean, wealth of knowledge, but and I'm also looking forward to what solutions are possible, and so that we can focus on what's possible and not what's theoretical. Right? Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank you, Dan, for your presentation and all the information that you imparted. I feel like I'm a lot more knowledgeable now than when we started this meeting, so I want to thank you for that. And the way you're able to explain things and present them is very helpful for us to be able to at least frame, the path forward. And I'm going to reserve my specific questions when we start to focus on areas like speed, altitude, and spread. So I'll go over those specific questions. I want to thank you.
When San Francisco goes to Southville, are there any changes to the procedures at San Francisco that might contribute to the noise problem?
So when San Francisco goes to the south, so they, the Tens, and which go out over the bay. And I do know for some of your communities, both Oakland and San Francisco departures, when they're departing that way, are a little bit lower. And so when they're over and so I know that we do get complaints from the communities during those periods because those departures aren't as high as they normally are, and so we get those complaints on that. So I would think possibly there.
I think our question, did it change San Jose?
So does it do, no. So San Jose is unique, and San Jose procedures change only based on San Jose. So San Francisco can be west flow or south flow, and it does not change San Jose. Not anything.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
That is from the second one, everybody else. Thank you for the information. Gary, do you have anything?
I'm sure there's a ton more, but for now, I just appreciate all you told me today. Appreciate it.
And it seems to me that what we learned from your comments are that the potential solutions that we have identified, it looks like the speed, there's nothing we can do about it because the new planes have to land faster. So the real conclusion for me seems like technology is a problem, but technology is the solution in the future. So right now, what seems to be the most promising is the dispersion, and you said it's complicated, and I agree, it's complicated, but with computers being more and more powerful, at some point, we're going to be able to do the dispersion in a safe way. So it may not happen tomorrow, but maybe someday not too far away. And the other potential solution is, I think, what you described as the GBAS, which would allow, coming in with steeper landings. So I'm hopeful that those are the potential solutions. They will take a little more time, but I think they seem to be feasible. I don't see other solutions identified. So anyway, that's my conclusion at this point.
There is something to consider too, and I don't know if you hired a noise specialist or something, but there is, for everything that you come up with, there's trade-offs, of course. And even for a steeper glide path, while that helps people further out, it actually tends to be detrimental to the people closer in. So just know that everything has a price to pay.
Clarification in layman's terms, it really helped. So one of the things you mentioned was 30,000 feet and the 5 miles out. So I always knew about the 5 miles, but I did not know it had to be at the 30,000. I thought it could be lower. So what if we push that 5 miles out further? Then calculus, integral calculus tells you that you can have a different slope. So why is that 5 miles so rigid?
So it could be further out, and at some airports, like Sacramento, where you aren't competing for airspace, we do intercept further out. Now, they're going to take that same path. So when they're 5 miles, they're going to be at the same altitude as they were. So
Would they be lower?
no, it is a constant.
If I can just say, I think what you were talking about, you're not 30,000 feet, 5 miles out.
That was my
So
confusion.
30,000 and 5 miles were two separate things.
Thank you for clarifying that.
They set up their FMS system, their computer on board the airplane. They need the information of what They need to tell us what approach they want when they're that high up and that far away from the airport.
And
That's
then
what she was
you,
trying to say.
so then at what point can you tell them? So at what height are they when you tell them?
So what height they're descending down into our airspace, and we typically, depending on how far they are from the airport, so if you have a runway and you were to draw an angle and it was 3 degrees, because 3 degrees is standard, so, you know, we're roughly 318 feet per mile. So if I'm a mile, I need to be at 318 feet, if I'm 2 miles, you know, so that, you just do that math from the ground up, and that's how high, and we have to be that height or lower. What you can't have is, here's this angle, this imaginary angle going to the runway. I cannot have an airplane dive for that.
But if you were 6 miles or 8 miles out,
Then I would be incrementally higher. So, yes, so your question about why couldn't I be further out from San Jose and be higher? I could. Couple things, though. When I'm 5, I'm still going to be lower, because I'm higher at 6, but I'm descending. So I am on this diagonal path regardless. So, but yes, if I were further out, I could be higher. The biggest problem when we're south flow is that I have a very narrow window. I need to be, if I'm on that ILS, I need to be at least this 5 miles out, but the further out I go, I have head-on aircraft. I have other aircraft going to San Francisco and Oakland that I'm now head-on with. I'm opposite direction to that, and I've got to get underneath those and get back turned in. We just run out of room. It's what Tony was talking about, that.
we heard that at the last meeting that their airspace and our airspace
Yeah.
is an issue. But then it's also the weather conditions, which I was corrected last time as wind conditions. So there can be much of a difference between 5 miles out and 8 miles out. The wind conditions you would know by then.
Yeah, the wind conditions are not going to impact 5 or 8 miles out at all. They are going to impact, are we landing this direction or are we landing this direction?
But I thought that is what would tell you whether you want to go south flow or not.
The wind is what tells
Yes,
us.
yes. And when can you pinpoint that? When can you specify to the pilot that, okay, now the wind conditions require us to turn you around?
As I mentioned last time, we have to go on forecasted winds. We don't have the ability, because we line up airplanes and we have a steady stream of airplanes coming in. And they're either lined up and they have in their system the approach for runway 12 or the approach for 30. And so when we have all these airplanes set up and we decide we need to change the direction of the airport because of the wind, we have to stop all those airplanes. We have to put them in holding if they're too close and they're not far enough away at that 30,000 feet to be able to reprogram their computers, put them in holding, switch the airport around, because we also have airplanes on the ground that have taxied to one end of the airport or the other. So if we switch from 30 to 12 and we have all the airplanes lined up on the south side, we need to put them and drive them all the way to the other end of the airport so they can line up at that side. So we have to switch the airport, have all of that right, clear the airspace in and around close to the airport before we have even switch, and then everybody else is in holding while we do that. So they're boring circles in the sky, and then we switch the airport, we give the information, re-clear those airplanes, now they can put it in their computers to clear the 12 or the 30 levels as well. So we don't have the ability to, the needle just clicked over, so let's switch the airport.
So you have to start pretty far out. But you said it is based on forecast. So that's, when you say that it's just forecast coming to you, that data comes to you from where?
They actually have wind instruments in the tower, and we do a weather evaluation every hour. But if the wind starts gusting, so if the wind, they start seeing it in the tower. So they have live, real live wind instruments. They see it and they'll see trends, and it'll start picking up, and they'll give us a heads up. It looks like next hour we're probably going to need to switch to south flow.
Okay, so you do get the heads up.
Yeah,
You do
the
get
tower
the
gives us a heads up.
Yeah, we have National Weather Service
Yeah.
as well.
It's a whole big dance. It's everybody talking because they're starting to see the shift. The needle is sitting at, 300 degrees, which is aligned with the 30 wind. And all of a sudden, you start to watch that thing shift. If you get it frontal passing or something moves, the needle will actually spin around. So now they see the direction going there, and now the speeds are starting to kind of even get up there. So the controller starts talking to the TRACON, like she said, National Weather Service is conferred with, there's another system that sits in the tower that they can actually go to that kind of gives them a little bit what you see on the news for like weather forecasting, it shows them the arrows, and it shows like the path of the way the jet stream's starting to move. All of that data is compiled to make the best decision, because when you do that dance, that switch, it takes like 20 minutes. The clearances have to be changed, the end of the runway have to be changed, the departures, the skies have to be cleared, so it all starts out, or it starts on the ground, and then everybody gets involved.
So one reason I was asking all this is not what you can do to change things, but if I was to ask a question, what kind of data I'm looking for, then I need to ask specifically for the days when you changed, depending on the wind and when you got that information. Okay, thank you. My second question is, if we were on the ground to monitor the sound, what kind of equipment is currently available? And what is the path?
We don't
You
have that
that.
information.
Whom would we ask that question of?
You want?
If I wanted, I mean, if there's a party next door which is loud, I call the cops, and they come and they say, okay, so, but for this is happening in
So
this
you want to
space.
know wind speeds on the ground?
No, I want to know how I can monitor the sound. Separate question. separate
So
question.
for example, the airport has, at either ends of the runway out, whatever distance, they have sound monitors that are connected into somewhere here at the airport, because when you go to those different radar track things and stuff, they can show what is the sound impact. But right now, the way they're set up is generally laid out for what is the direct approach or a direct takeoff from the runway.
So is that monitor available retail? Is that something?
Then come close to the, say your name and all that good stuff.
So I'm sorry, I'm Kurt Eicherman. I work for the airport here in San Jose. As you're describing, we do have monitoring sites that are off the ends of the approach and departure ends of the runway. The information from those monitors is publicly available. You can find it on our website. We can show you how to get it. As far as
But that doesn't help the residents who are in.
So at the end of the last meeting, off to the side, the informal question, I have asked the airport if they could provide information for me, what it would cost to get any of those and go ahead and hook them up so it could be connected into their stuff, and so I could find out what that cost, and maybe we want to put some of those in Sunnydale once we find out the cost, we tell anybody else. Because that's one of the challenges we have, is you have that measured noise where typically they've mostly been focused at what is takeoff and direct landing, and maybe we could spread some of those around the valley.
So, and just to give you a little something to think about is those are paid for by the FAA through grant funding, right, to monitor noise in the area. Right? It's part of a program that we had installed many, many years ago. We wouldn't be eligible to install those in all of the communities around. There's a specific use of those to measure the noise here at the airport.
But if somebody else paid for it, we could feed it to you, right?
Another city could purchase a system. There's maintenance and costs associated with that. I'm not sure we want to get into everybody installing noise monitors and putting that information into our ANON system. But there are systems out there that you can use to measure that. And we'll be happy to give that information.
And I'll just say, I've spoken to this whole brand of FAA or consultants, not FAA, but consultants out there about stuff, and they're glad to do it for you for free.
So you already have the information.
It is very.
You have the same question basically, so we can take it up.
How do we get real, specific metric data? Did you have anything else?
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Because it's interesting we talked about. Oh, yeah, here, let's go to Mary Lynn. Thank you very much. Mary Lynn, do you hear us? Okay, Mary Lynn, if you come back, yell and break in, and we'll go ahead and get to you. Stuff that we talked about, the glide path and the way we want to go ahead and do this, that's a lot of what Johnny's constituency, because that's the normal flow, either it's coming in from the south, and that's kind of what's there, and not these complicated airspaces like here in New York and stuff. What we're describing here is kind of this horseshoe effect that happens over Cupertino, Sunnyvale, Mountain View as they go out and then make a U-turn. So, it's, where exactly do you think, where does kind of like final approach start? I mean, trying to understand, because you talk about this GBAS, and that might be able to do this stuff, but I'm not sure that would really have much impact on what is the first part of the horseshoe leg before they've gone and made that turn coming south. So I kind of want to set expectations that, would that have a lot of, is GBAS more for what is, once you've made the turn, you're out over the bay coming straight in, or would it impact all the way over the whole piece of Sunnyvale, Cupertino, and Mountain View?
It could impact the entire flight path. It can do S-turns. It can do a U-turn. Because it does have a higher angle, then perhaps you could fly over terrain that today we can't fly over because we need to be too low. So it could very well have a big impact. It'd have to be looked at. Of course, part of the problem also is not just the technology again, is before you can move aircraft, there are environmental laws too. So let's say we go, oh, it gives us the ability to go over these mountains where we're not going today. Well, that would have to go through the environmental process, which of course I can't.
And I don't think, I have low confidence we can do rapid shifts where these paths actually go.
Just didn't want to make sure I wasn't promising things.
Let me get to another constraining factor.
Yeah.
So the other piece of that, so even if they stay on their current route that they're flying, the other piece to that is that if we raise them up higher, now we've impacted the other flows in and around the bay.
And that's what I wanted to kind of get to, because it seems to me, as we keep coming around, when we talk about a lot of the parameters that are, really impact this, it has to do with how far south San Francisco's airspace comes. If I think if the tabletop is the ground, they've got this above airspace, and that when we're coming into San Jose on South Flow, we're having to stay below what is San Francisco's airspace. So that's really the big constraining factor of what we do is as we come in over Cupertino, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, make a U-turn and come around. The real constraining factor, or a primary one, I don't want to lock you on a specific thing, is that we're having to deal with, we can't get higher because of, we can't get into the San Francisco airspace. Is that correct?
Yes. Now, I think if you ask specific questions, we could definitely look at things. We can always look at things. I think you're understanding some of our limitations of what we can and can't do. We do know that we can go further north than the current RMP track. We do know we can do that because we do it with the ILS. Does that provide any relief? I don't know. It might be worse. That's where you guys have to tell us what you want us to look at, what works.
So, and I'm going to come back to you and say, ask specific questions. We might ask you, what are the specific questions we should ask you? But when San Jose goes into South Florida, and if SFO goes into, I don't know what they call it, South Florida, whatever it is, where they're not doing their normal landing is they're coming south and they make a U-turn to go north. If they change from that, does that mean that that airspace that they're trying to grab so far south is now free and available that we could go higher?
It's taken up with departures instead of arrivals.
The other end of the airport now, the airplanes are taking off. So
So,
rather than landing to the north, now they're taking off to the south, right towards San Jose.
San Francisco
Don't they still
doesn't,
take off west
surprisingly, San Fran is this.
Right.
And so they land this way and depart this way on a normal route. On a normal, they land to the west, so that's opposite direction of your south flow. And they depart north on their 90% of the time. When they go the other way, they depart the way they land. So now in that area where you currently have the San Francisco arrivals, you have the San Francisco departures. They don't land and depart the same runways.
they always do this. Because that's
So
the only way
San
they
Francisco primarily lands from the south.
They take off on a 100-degree head
They take off to the north and they land west.
when they swap the airport.
They normally
They don't like
land,
this.
they normally land 2-8, so they land almost due west, and they depart north. And then when they switch, they're departing. Yeah.
So don't confuse the
So it's-
direction of the bay as being north and south. It really is.
Okay, well,
So that runway parallels the water, but that's really a 280 head.
okay, but that's fine, but that's fine. They're coming from down this direction.
Yeah, it is frustrating because you would think, well, gee, if I'm landing this way, I should be able to depart that way, but they don't, they cross. They cross, that's the only way they can get traffic in and out. They have to land simultaneously and depart simultaneously.
Glenn, if I may,
Yeah, we were trying to get you before. Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
yeah, I think I hit the mute button, you know, cut myself off, this question. First of all, I want to say again, how much I appreciate the discussion and the forthright answers and the English that I'm hearing from our experts here that I didn't hear from the FAA during the selection meeting. So I want to appreciate that. What I have heard twice now is with the new technology, we are locked in to a certain new process and we cannot go backwards. I've heard that twice now, both meetings. The next thing I've heard is G-bases are coming up and that aircraft is now being produced that will fly quiet. How do we as a community make, because those are the only two things that I've heard so far that indicate that there could be some relief in the future from the noise. How do we as a community then push to get a quieter aircraft built so that we can reduce the noise without spending money on figuring out what noise is on the ground? Because I don't see, even if we measure the noise on the ground, how that changes the noise on the ground.
So one of your challenges here at San Jose is the type aircraft that fly in and out of San Jose. And I mean that by that you have a large corporate contingency also. You do have commercial aircraft that then as they buy newer airplanes, as they upgrade their fleet, they will have the GBAS capability. I don't know when that will happen with your corporate. Yeah. So I don't want to discourage you. I think that is still something that the airport, and I think the airport will naturally get there. It is a very large investment, and they're going to have to see a return on it, obviously. So, and they would know. They know their fleet mix better than I do. So while I would still look at that, and the aircraft departing and landing electrically, there's some, if you Google it, you can see that there are some, but they're all prototypes. It's all testing. There's nothing in actual production that's doing that right now. They are testing it. Boeing's testing it. There's a private company that has an electric jet that's entirely electric. So those are really long-term goals. I would think as a group.
But if I could cut in here, but again, that would be a decision the airport has to
Right.
make. That's an expense that they would have to look at. so.
Absolutely. There's nothing that we can't, right, that's a good point. That is an airport decision, and it has to be viable for them. And with the type of airplanes that are flying in here, that might be tough for a while. So I would encourage you to just look at everything that you can.
So looking at everything that we can, and you keep talking about, I'm sorry, Mary Lynn, did you have anything else?
No, that is the one question, looking at everything we can. And the other question that I keep asking, and was kind of alluded to, that if we raise the height on one thing, then do we affect the other? I go back to sounding like a broken record, but it has to do with the brick flight pattern. And have you found anything that says moving south slow will affect the new to be installed or initiated brick flight?
So I'm not sure, I do know that there's a request to raise the altitude on the bricks. And
Yes.
so it's currently 11,000 feet. And, yeah, so I'm not, yeah, but I've never been, that's never really been explained to me what the issue on the bricks really is. I mean, we're talking.
San Francisco issue.
Which
surfer
San
going?
Jose South Road.
Briggs goes under surfer.
Right,
That's not this.
issue.
right, okay.
I'm not
good.
hearing you, I'm sorry.
So, yeah, it's not really, that's not really a south flow issue.
Yeah, so if brick is not a south flow issue, and again, I don't know, if it's not though, that is outside the jurisdiction of this committee.
Okay, well, I know it isn't, but I need the clarification that if we were to, as a South Flow committee, make any changes, would that then have a negative effect on what is being planned for brick?
Mary Lynn, this is Glenn. I think that, first off, the South Flow Committee, what we're gonna be able to do is make a recommendation that maybe we'd like to have the FAA look at X or Y or Z. We can't actually cause those things to happen, and as part of asking the FAA if they look at that, they'd have to look at all the aspects and parameters and potential changes across the board for anything we might recommend. All we can do is recommend where things are going to be looked at or examined or whatever. I don't think anybody's given us the authority to actually change anything.
No, and I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if we as a committee make a recommendation that we don't know would have an effect on what they are going to be doing, will the FAA continue with its promise to fix brick?
So,
That's just my general question out there, that if it doesn't have anything to do with South Flow, I don't have a problem with whatever kind of recommendations you're coming up with. I just want to make sure that something that is already in process will not be hampered by what this committee is doing.
Yeah, the FAA people are all shaking their head no.
No.
I'm thrilled. Thank you.
Okay,
Doing all the things that we can. I don't know if you wanted to follow up on that or not, because you were asking that question.
yeah, I was starting to ask something, and I lost my train of thought from where you were before, or when you came in with your stuff, so I'm sure it'll come back to me.
My train of thought was quieting the aircraft, doing the GBAS and everything else that we can for noise abatement, I guess you would call it. The other thing was the monitors on the ground. And I don't know if that'll clue something up for you or not.
No. What I think I want to do is, we've kind of been around here and stuff. I'm going to see if people from the audience, if they want to go ahead and speak on their stuff. And then I think the next part is if people have, not what are their specific, recommendations or changes that they want to do, but do you have any other questions for Dan or the FAA people in terms of gathering what might be things that you might want to be putting on the list of what we're going to suggest, because I know you said some other questions, so let me go to the public and then we'll come back around and see if there's anything there. Mary Jo Freeman.
Mary Jo Fremont, and I'm a resident of Palo Alto, and I want to touch upon a few things that were discussed. The environmental law, I think this is the order 1051F. This is for the environmental assessment that the FAA has to do sometimes, not always. And my question to the committee is, has the FAA done this environmental assessment for the various changes to the San Jose South Flow since 2011? And if they did, then we should look at the results and the assumptions made in the modeling and the characteristic of the model they used. This is important because we will understand the impact on the people, which is completely absent of the discussion here. If they have not, they can still do it. They don't need to do an environmental assessment. They can use the famous NOMS data and the modeling tool called AEDT that the FAA uses, and they can show, again, the impact on people. The second point is the myth that I want to dispel on, yeah, there are more airplanes, so therefore there is more noise. I'll tell you, I'm the poster child I've lived in Palo Alto in the same house for 20 years. I've not moved. If anything, I've improved my windows. I got hit by noise from San Jose South Flow as well as San Francisco in 2015. And I can tell you from 2014 to 2015, and I'll pick on San Francisco, they're not here, but the noise exploded over my house, and at the same time, the number of planes that landed at San Francisco in 2015 was fewer than 2014. So when people tell me that we have noise because there are more airplanes, it's a myth. Yeah, there are more airplanes, but that doesn't explain the noise explosion. Look at the data. And then blaming the technology, that's a lame duck here. We are in Silicon Valley. We know about technology, many of us. So use the technology for the people, don't blame it. Thank you.
And the next, Phil.
Landisman, thank you. I want to thank FAA for, again, describing the situation. I know that there are a lot of constraints, and there's a lot of opportunity ahead. And so I just want to thank Van for saying that she encouraged us to look at everything. I am disappointed with the chair's comment that he says low confidence with radical shifts. Next Gen was a radical shift. It was a discontinuous change, which has created severe health problems for people, closer to the ground. So I believe that the FAA is taking it seriously because of that. I don't think they are doing this because, you know, they are showing up. I think that everybody knows that this is a serious issue. So building up on what Ms. Fremont said, I want to just mention that the tools that exist can model a route in a day or two. So you can look at everything, you can calibrate the models. This is work that can be done in weeks. It doesn't have to take a year and a half to do an environmental review. I would look at an environmental review as a community discussion. And you're here because you're representing us, the people on the ground. And so by taking the ball out of the field before it's even, the game has even started, we don't have a chance with the Southwest, Delta, whoever it is that needs to do whatever procedure they need to do. This is our chance to be able to design procedures that also work for people on the ground. So I encourage you not just to look at everything, but making sure that the analysis, the baselines are solid, because I don't think your recommendations are going to be credible if they're not. Thank you.
Jennifer T.
Sorry about that.
I actually just, as I was listening to everything, I had a few questions specifically, particularly about, for example, the database meters that we were talking about or the noise meters that we were talking about. I know there was some talk not just of listening to the average decibel levels, but for example, trying to determine what specific aspects or parameters make the flights particularly loud. Is it the actual airline? Is it the vicinity, the concentration? So that was one comment I wanted to make. The other question that I had is, when San Jose Airport begins flying South Flow, when it takes place, does that impact the use of the dual simultaneous runways at San Francisco Airport? In other words, Van, when South Flow triggers, can SFO still fly the simultaneous runways toward the west? Or does it limit to a single runway now? That was one of the questions. And then another comment was on the technology. I know that's something that we can be looking forward to, but we're probably looking 30 years out on some of that, 30 or 40 years, so that doesn't really offer any relief for residents currently. And then finally, I was wondering about the feasibility of moving, you know how South Flow loops? It's pretty close to San Jose Airport. If that loop was moved farther out over the bay, would that be feasible during South Flow so that the flights could be higher over land? Would that be possible, especially if there is an impact to SFO where it no longer can use simultaneous runways, so it kind of clears the bay? Thank you.
Zachary Kaufman.
This is a little bit retro, so I apologize for that. I've heard the term on the rail. I was concerned by slide 15 from the presentation last time. post OAPM on the South Flow slide did not show this. I was wondering the FAA's account for this. We never heard an explanation. Reviewing the audio, it was a little after 45 minutes in. As this is fundamentally at the core of what is going on, does the FAA still stand by the slide as a meaningful depiction? I was wondering what their thoughts were. Thank you.
Next is
This is addressing the issue of noise monitoring. If you look at the Santa Cruz group, they set up an extensive network of noise monitoring stations throughout the county. And they didn't spend much money doing it. They bought sound level meters, commercial quality, and microcomputers, and they have a system and a website that reports all the sound all over the county. So it's not something that costs even tens of thousands of dollars. It can be done rather inexpensively. And I'm sure they would be glad to share that with the Silicon Valley cities. Thank you.
So that was the last set of speaker cards that I had on that right there. Does the FAA want to respond to any of the questions that the residents might ask?
Yeah, so the questions about San Francisco, as we stated earlier, San Jose has no impact on, its operation has no impact on San Francisco. So
with the current parameters we're operating.
Completely independent, right. So the flow into San Jose does not impact San Francisco's flow and vice versa.
With the current parameters, she did ask if you would modify it, if they would, and that would have to, if you asked us to look at that, we'd have to look at that.
So I've heard from my colleagues, multiple of my colleagues said here, okay, well, what's the answer? I want to get the answers. And I'll look for a little feedback of what might be the easiest way to do this. Do we just want to go around and go, here, I've got option A, option B, option C, we can just make a long list of what those are, and then we'll have a discussion about those. I don't know whether that will be today or not. Or are there any other questions that we want to ask, you might want to ask the FAA that might have a bearing on whether or not you think you want to ask for something that kind of trying to open up to you guys as well. But I do think we want to move in the direction of, through last week and through this week, we have a better understanding of our of the airspace and the complexity and stuff.
Then I have an alternative proposal that you take the lead, and from what you've heard, list some possible solution that you come up with, and we'll see if we agree or not, and add to it and subtract from it as we go along, so we don't waste too much more time.
Okay. I've seen anybody disagree with that?
I'll second that.
Okay, I'm gonna, there's already, I think everybody's seen this, there's a potential idea for noise mitigation on Southfield. There's a list, I'm gonna start with that, and I'll just go down and kind of read that. I'm assuming for right now, as long as one person says, yeah, we should, this is worth creating a list, I think there's gonna be a separate process or a continuing process we might want to prioritize and talk about whether we like or dislike. But this is just this is the all ideas are good ideas kind of stuff. So one is, and maybe you can help out when we get to, you can help make sure I don't miss anything.
And just so that you know, that was actually, the group does not have that list. That was just something that was sort of floated. And again, that's captured amongst what you guys have sort of said. This is not airport recommended or anything, it's just trying to capture the ideas as you guys were discussing.
So this is all going to become public record. So,
yeah.
And these are no particular order. So limit planes to a maximum of 200 knots once the planes are under 4,000 feet. That's all. Increase the recommended altitude of Zorsa waypoint back to 3,200 feet. I would also add into that, I think we saw in the information from the FAA last time as we were learning how to read these, you can have the number, and if there's a line underneath the number, then that turns it into a minimum. So I think we want to look at making sure that we have the waypoints over all of our affected cities, that maybe we look at having minimum, those to be defined as minimums, not just altitudes. On Airbus 320 aircraft require the installation of air deflectors to quiet the whining noise. That's another one. Create a second flight path of Southflow that is within 1 mile of the current flight path to distribute planes between the two. Both flight paths would converge before they turn the line up with the airport. I think this is really the dispersion piece of what was being talked about. Let's find a way to actually try and spread that around.
Can I ask a question about that one? Is that, are you saying that we should look at a new visual approach for 12L and
I didn't write this down. I think what it's trying to say is that through the GPS stuff, planes fly a much more precise track, which is kind of narrowing the area where they're impacted. Find a way to go back to the way it used to be, where we impact more people, just less amount of the time.
This is instead of one rail, you have two rails.
Well, or
dispersion of some
some dispersion, and I think that's really what is there a way to go ahead and disperse the traffic over, so it's not exactly a fine line?
Right, now, I actually want to just add on to that. Do we want to be specific and saying two flight paths versus just dispersing?
Well, but I think we should say disperse right now. Let's be a little bit more generic in what that was. Because then we're only cutting the problem in half.
Yeah, exactly.
Have planes gradually descend along a smooth descend flight pattern to limit stepping and the need for engines to maintain, putting the engines on to maintain altitude. Are there procedures that are quieter than other types of procedures without impacting safety? I also want to add, this may be a stretch, but let's look at, could we go ahead and change what is SFO's airspace so that it doesn't, they don't control it all so far south? So that was the initial list of what I had.
I was going to say there was also another, in the audience, I thought there was another good suggestion in terms of expanding the northern loop across the water.
Glenn, the one you mentioned of dispersion, after that you had one, would you need OPD, optimal profile descent?
I have no OPD on mine, but maybe that's what I meant. This is just a list of stuff. It had to do with have planes gradually descend along a smooth descent line.
That's OPD.
And again, I think the challenge is we run into San Francisco airspace. Of what goes on.
I'm going to add GBAS.
GBAS.
what about showing which type of aircraft contributes to the noise?
That might be a question of data. Before, let me ask this question of the FAA. We hear a lot about there are a multitude of different aircraft that we have to do, and you're trying to define procedures that work for all of those. Is it correct that you're trying to find, a procedure that creates an envelope that all aircraft can work in? Or is it possible to create, maybe there's, hypothetically, just when we get about, if there are aircraft types that could fly a steeper descent, could we have a procedure for that type of aircraft and then a different procedure for the type of aircraft that can't do that? Or are you trying to put that all in one today?
So you can have special procedures that are for, airlines can create them for, and then they decide who can fly them. So yes, you can have specials. It's not unheard of. It's not, I'm going to say from air traffic's perspective, we discourage it.
Okay, well, this is all ideas are good ideas for sure.
Yes.
But remember, so what's on there right now captures all types of airplanes, but it doesn't mandate that the airplanes fly at 210 knots. And when there's a range of altitudes, unless it is crossed at an altitude affixed, then it gives that latitude to the pilot for speed and altitude.
Okay.
So because of the differences in airplanes, so if you create, so right now they're flying as the requirements dictate for the airplane. So if you create specials for each individual airplanes, the same thing because they're going to fly it with the specifications for the aircraft are.
Built into how they design it.
In other words, we give a window right now for the different types of airplanes and the different types of certification and what the pilots are certified for as well as the airplane. And so then they will then fly within that window somewhere depending upon those certifications and allowances of the airplane.
One of these special procedures on my list for right now, we probably have to be more specific about what we mean by that. But what I'm hearing you say, and you guys have said this multiple times, is regardless of what a procedure is or is not, there's still the latitude that the pilot of that airline has of how they stay within some of those procedures.
Yeah, in order to keep the flight on a descent where it doesn't stall or go into, they have their criteria.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's asking for this to go in this way.
So another one, we know that San Francisco's trigger point is 10 knots, where it's 5 knots here at San Jose. And is there any room in between there? Could it be 6 knots here or 7 knots here for the wind speed change?
I'm going to put that on the list. I think I've heard lots of things from the airport and FAA about why there's a challenge with that, but let's have it on the list. Because generically, I've always looked at this as, could we fly south flow less? Could we have shorter duration of south flow? And that when we're in south flow, what is it that can actually be done differently so that it has less noise impact on the ground? Those are the 3 buckets I was going to. Sir?
You know, we have a number of waypoints that airplanes follow to get into the land. And each one of those has a set of criteria between flight attitude, speed, those kinds of things. Is it possible to relax some of that criteria, allow a little more latitude and potentially cut the noises and
So, how do I, so we will give a criteria that
relax,
what?
relax the positional criteria of a particular waypoint coming in. Is it possible to give a range of performance in altitude, speed, whatever else may be involved, to allow a quieter approach? And I'm thinking, for example, I know one airport that says be here at 4,000 feet. Well, it's 4,200 okay, it's 3,800 okay. A little latitude as opposed to at. And that might well allow the flight attitude to come back.
So I'm going to define that as relax the, so relax the positional criteria of waypoints, create ranges of altitude and airspeed. And it sounds like the pilots have already done that.
Well, they'll do that anyhow. The question is are they trying over the target, hit the target that they do get?
It's on, I'm on the list. I'm not trying to quash anybody's idea at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
Regarding the GBAS, for instance, and Dan made a comment about, you know, as it comes in, that like the seabird comes in, that it would be quieter, but the end result, like, would create more noise. And so I'm wondering if there's any way that can, like a simulation can be created to test that, you know, to see if the noise mitigation, if it will help in noise mitigation.
I think we're going to want to ask for simulate, you know, this is still just a list of what we're going to go ahead and they're going to have to do their investigation and research, and they got to go talk to the 1,900 departments within FAA that says they can or can't do anything.
Right.
So that will all have to be part of it before we get to that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still, my concern is you keep running into San Francisco airspace. Even if you had a steeper thing down, you got to get to that point.
Right. And then I had a note to myself regarding flight standards and does it take noise into consideration? Thank you.
Anybody else from my colleagues?
Not so much a solution, but for everything was mentioned earlier, I might see that any solution will come with price and what it's
Yeah, that's gonna be the evaluation that happens.
Just asking what kind of solution and walk away, that's not the answer.
I'm not walking away with it. And oh, by the way, I'm gonna let the public talk here to get your ideas in a second too. And we're also gonna need to, I'm not gonna consider this the end all this because I think as part of the meeting minutes that we publish out to our different communities, we should tell everybody out there, send your ideas to us so that we can try and get the superset of this, because what I'm just, we're not done yet today, but I'm thinking here we're in kind of a, let's get all this kind of stuff, then our next meeting might be when we can try and get other input from the public and stuff like that. That might be where we might want to sort the criteria, group on these different options, not that we're all going to do it all right here and walk out. So I don't want anybody to think here we've got our next 60 minutes and that'll all be done. So any other ideas from right here? Okay. Mary Lynn, did you have something you wanted to say? I'll take that. She's done talking to me.
That happens all the time.
So we're going to take.
That's a classic.
So I tell you what, while you try and see if we can get her back on the. So we've been here for almost 2 hours. Potentially we could be here for another 2 hours. I'm kind of hoping not. But why don't we just take a 5 or 10 minute break? You guys okay with that? And then we'll come back yet. You don't have to fill out a card if you've already filled. If I already have your name up here,
Okay.
just go ahead and make a line, and we'll go ahead and go to whoever was up.
Nobody? Okay, not everybody at once. Okay. So I was not prepared to propose a solution, but I want to encourage the committee to think that that you need to think at the system level. So as someone said, the next gen was not a small change, it was a drastic change. Even though the ground track may have shifted just a mile west, which seems small, the solution to that problem is not going to be tweaking here and there. This Metroplex is a system. If you want to solve problems, you look at it from a system perspective. It may sound crazy, but not really. If you fix some San Francisco arrivals problem, very likely you're going to fix the San Jose South Flow. And I'll follow up with some ideas to the committee members. To fix the San Francisco arrivals problem, we need to get beyond surfer needs to move to a big surground track, because that is not a solution. It's the same. So you're not going to move the airspace. You know, the San Francisco airspace is going to be what it needs to be. The San Jose airspace is probably going to stay the same. What you need to do is look at the whole bay and try to think about where should these planes fly if we really want to take care of people. And I'll tell you, when you start looking at this, and I'm not an aeronautic and astronautic person, I've learned a lot in the last 3 years. I'm trained as a scientist. I've dealt with a lot of technical people. There's plenty of expertise in the bay to really find solutions, but you need to raise to the level of the system. Don't try to tweak a flight track here and there, a waypoint here and there. Or raising an altitude by 500 feet buys you nothing. Even 1,000 feet buys you nothing. So you need to look, the assignment should be, if you were to design a Metroplex today with 3 different airports, and you know where the people are, what would you do? Take a fresh look, and you may find some interesting solutions. And I'll follow up with that.
Next.
Opportunity to be able to provide suggestions. I also don't have solutions, but I think process is really important. I think that it's premature to have discussions of what the impacts on the ground are without using the tools and having some data and looking at potential models. And heat maps, something that has been discussed, and I hope the airport is following up on the environmental group to come and explain what ADT is and how it can be used. So I think that that's a first step, and a key part of that is that Order 1051F provides for the use of supplemental metrics. So we're not limited to just looking at noise by looking at DNL. We can look at different things, single events and other things. And scientists locally here have looked at specific impacts from these routes and ways to kind of have a metric. And so I think that's the first step. I'm a little bit wary of, I'm going to throw this out there, dispersion I don't think works anymore with the new system. I think it's about distribution. And I know that's a very ugly word for many people, but it can actually be the source of eliminating a lot of the noise. Because, 8% growth in traffic and SFO has resulted in our area in exponential amount of noise. So I would just kind of look at language. Is it dispersion or is it distribution? And prepare that this is, we all have to share the burden, but we shouldn't have to give the burden to somebody else. We have to eliminate some of the really big problems first. And we can't leave it all on a few people because that is where those people are getting hurt. So I think we should think of the people that are going to be most hurt first and then kind of work the system, because we obviously don't want to burden anyone. But with the new system, we have to be open to possibilities, look at distribution to reduce the burden. And process is really important about having data and modeling. Thank you.
Okay. My preferred solution would be to revert to the waypoint on the STAR procedure, the final waypoint on the STAR procedure from Zorsa back to Jezen where it was prior to 2015. Take the coordinate, the final coordinate for Zorsa out of the flight management system for the STAR procedures. There's a little bit of a turn that airplanes had to make after Jezen to head on their way to the airport. And when the pilots had some discretion, they made that turn a fraction of a second later. And that introduced the dispersion that we previously enjoyed. If the airplanes are on flight management systems that take them to Jezen, take them to Haiti, or take them to Zorsa, they're going to be loud and they're going to be concentrated. So unwinding back to Jezen, I think is really important, encouraging pilot discretion. Now, one of the things I heard today that I was disappointed to hear was that we can't go back with technology. And I spent my career separating cants from wolves as a product manager working in companies. And people would often tell me they can't do things, and really after you asked a lot of really good questions, you found out that they wouldn't do it. And that it actually could be done, and I actually won some of those discussions, believe it or not. But it requires really peeling the onion, sometimes several layers, on the objections that come up. Is it a technological issue or is it a legal issue? Is this a requirement from Congress or is it a requirement because the airplanes simply no longer have the equipment in them and the equipment can't be purchased? Let's get down to cases. Is it a safety issue or is it an efficiency issue? Sometimes safety issues arise because we have adopted a higher efficiency target. And putting airplanes very close to one another, one right after the other, is going to raise some safety issues that weren't there before. Maybe we can relax the spacing a little bit between airplanes and what was a safety issue goes away. Airlines prefer it. We don't have any influence over the airlines. Well, there are ways to work with airlines. There are even some financial incentives that we could cook up to help airlines see things in a way that's more amenable to folks on the ground. And finally, as we're looking at the procedures and any changes to the procedures, I think we ought to do a thorough assessment of the procedures that we have for noise. We should look at the RNP approach and see if it can't be tuned. We should look at the impact that having a steeper descent between Haiti and Zorsa is. And yes, the descent is steeper than it was before. And see if that caused some of the increase on the ground in Zorsa. Finally, we should ask ourselves, since the airplanes coming on the RNP approach to Zorsa are sharing the same rail as the airplanes that are now on the STAR procedure, what impacts the RNP procedure may have on the airplanes that are taking the STAR procedure and continuing on through Mountain View? Those two things need to be looked at together. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Is there anybody?
The only thing that I wanted to mention was on the dispersion. I definitely think that the planes need to be somehow dispersed again. And then I am going to go back to the Sunnyvale team and talk to them about some ideas that they had, but I think we need to present them in a way that would be palatable for the committee. So we will come back and we'll let you know between these meetings some of the suggestions that we have, because I think we may have some viable solutions here. Thank you.
Anybody else? We'll come back. Did anything else get spawned by colleagues? I want to go back. I want to ask a couple questions of FAA. And this is a question, so is it possible, is this something the airport might provide or a different part of the FAA? As we look at this, we've been kind of looking at an overhead map when we talk about this dispersion question of where the traffic is. Would it be possible to get a kind of more of a horizontal view of what's happening with altitude that would show, so if I was looking sideways at it, so I'd see a plane's coming down this way, it's, you know, flat, it's going, you know, so that we could, and is it possible to get information like that? And are you the right people to ask that for, or would I ask somebody else?
So I guess it really depends on whether you're talking about, one of the problems we have in some of the displays that we provided in slides is it shows a multitude of airplanes, and you can't make one up from another, and you can't really see what you're looking at. But we have a lot of different things. We can even take an individual flight track and place it over Google Earth, and you can actually see it from different angles and sides, and from the side view, from overhead. And so we can do that, but the problem becomes one of multiple. You can't like do lots of them. But you can, I think I mentioned the last time we were here, with all of the different tools and things that are out there, where you hear an airplane, you go outside to see one, you can actually go on Flight Tracker and find out what that airplane is that's really noisy, that you're hearing really loud. You can actually get a call sign and a date and a time for us. And if I have that information, then I can take that call sign and she can actually look and plot that out and show what that exact airplane did versus another one that you maybe see but you don't hear. And so that would be something we could actually give you, say, here's two airplanes and you saw this one, you saw them both, but you heard this one really loud and not this one. We could get you the information on who that airplane was, what type of airplane it was, what route they were on, what may have been different about it, because we can listen to the recordings. Perhaps it was on vectors versus and taken off of the arrival for extra spacing that was needed. We would be able to give that specific. When we give those slides that are all PDARs, called PDARs data with all the multiples, you can't see anything through it. And you can filter it in certain ways, and you can actually reduce the numbers. But I think it's still a bunch of lines on a map, you know. But a real airplane that shows a flight track and an altitude, and if you see it and hear it and tell us, we can look at it.
So I'm pretty sure that some member in my community is going to be able to give me some specific call signs, dates, and stuff to try and do that. So I think that'll come to you.
And a comparison. So like you mentioned, you know, is there
If
one that was
allowed
different?
one and not
Yeah.
Right, what
Yeah.
worked about this one but didn't with this one? What do you want to know that was different?
I can guarantee you we're going to try and give you that. I want to go back to the question I was asking on kind of this horizontal view, where you say here, you know, is it one plane or multiple planes? Would it be possible to show, if you just wanted to say here, what's the average, and then kind of, you know, what's the you know, I'll just say the outlier up and the outlier down, with something like that, so that you can try and get a sense of what the average is and what the extremes are.
I'll let Van explain that, because she can manipulate PDARs a bit. I can't.
Yes, we can do that. You can show all the tracks from the side, and you'll actually see the band, and you can see the individual, and you'll see if they come down and level off, or you'll see if they continue.
Yeah, so we'll try and make a request for that, because I think trying to be able to get you know, if we do the similar thing of the width, but we've been mostly looking down, I think it might be useful also to kind of look sideways. And if we could also say here, that's what it was over San Jose, and here's where it was over Cupertino, here's where it was over Mountain View, just to get a sense of what that, so we can really get zeroed in on what that looks like. In terms of asks for the FAA, I've been trying to keep a list, and so if you could, we'll write this up to you, but if you think one of the things I'm saying right here is gonna be a real problem, raise your hand now. You can always say real problem later, but just to kind of keep it, do some research and come back with a specific answer about whether or not the track is moved to the west or not. And you can either say yes, no, or I'm just telling you what the list is. Is there a way to determine if this hand fly versus the computer's flying the plane, impacts noise, and this goes back to the simulation and the modeling, what's used in the models?
I do not know unless Flight Standards has some information on that.
It's coming. You can come back with an official answer. I think there's this thing about, responses to the Holbrook memo, and maybe we'll get some, if we can get specific questions as opposed to just a generic response, if there are specific things we'd like to see. How do we push for GBATs?
The airport. We need to talk to the airport about that. That's airports.
It's a financial investment, the airport.
That's going to be a question to the airport. What does that specifically mean? How to do that. There was this question that was asked about, was there an environmental assessment that was done since 2011? And I wrote different numbers down. There's a 1025-1 or a 1050-1F. Does a document like that exist?
So the 1050 is the order that requires the environmental, and yes, there was an environmental done in 2011.
So somebody can send us a link for what that is.
It's done for a specific procedure, so you can request that, and I don't know if they're going to, what the FAA will say when you request that, if they'll make you FOIA it or not, I just don't know. But,
and then just when we talk about environmental documents, they can include lots of things or not include things. Do the environmental documents that these 10, whatever number that you guys do, is one of the things it goes and looks at, is it impact of noise at ground level?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Not really.
Because it can have a lot of stuff in it. It doesn't have that. It's not part of what we're looking for.
But Mayor Hendricks, that's fine to put it in there because we'll toss that over the fence to the environmental.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm just trying to go through. I already talked about a horizontal altitude map, and then you just said here, specific call sign examples, and I'm sure we'll be able to get some of our members of the public and see if we can get those to try and zero in on that particular stuff.
If I can offer too, sometimes that data takes time to pull. So, okay, all right.
I'm assuming these things we're going to ask for, you're going to say, sure, no problem, we have it right away. Here, it's going to take us X amount of time, whatever that might be, to get it, or thank you very much for asking, but we don't do that. Those are kind of the three generic buckets. I'm sure you have your own language of how you say this. As I was going through either things I was asking for or other stuff, is there anything, my colleagues, that I might have missed? She was first. No, she was.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. There's all these she's over here. But I just wanted to ask if it would be possible for the airports to talk, since, flight paths, any sort of tweaks or system changes and so forth affects another airport and their pathway. Is there any way for the airports to start talking to each other so that they can come up with a solution system-wide versus just each airport acting or working isolated?
So just so I understand the question, is you're asking the airports to try and create different flight paths, or?
I'm not asking you to create different flight paths. I'm asking if you guys, as a Metroplex, can start working together to come up with solutions so that, you're not interfering into each other's flight paths, and, you're not saying, oh, I can't do this because I might be impacting San Francisco's air path or Oakland's air path or even Palo Alto or San Carlos airports, But if there's a dialogue that's open between all the airports, so we a system solution can come to be formed.
Sure. I think the system solution is at the Metroplex level, and the airports don't determine flight paths. The
So
airport,
who determines, so,
flight paths are all,
Are you suggesting that,
I'm
that,
suggesting.
so there won't be another airplane going to San Francisco or Oakland while the one is going to San Jose, so the flight paths won't impact each other?
No.
No, I want you guys, I want to ask you if you can, if the system-wide solution can be something that, that is not discussed in isolation. That there is a dialogue that's going on between all the airports that is impacting this region. And I don't know
So,
if you
yeah,
can
so it
solve
wouldn't be
it by
airports.
doing.
Get you off the hook, Matt. It wouldn't be,
Yeah, so,
it
okay,
wouldn't
so
be
I'm
airports,
glad
it
that
would
you
be.
determined it's not airports.
So I think what one of the members of the public mentioned
Right.
earlier, it's like start over with a clean slate and design all new procedures into all of the competing airports for the Bay Area. Of course, that could be done, but you're talking lots and lots and lots and lots of money and lots of time. But because you're basically doing everything from scratch then and creating all new routes. If you, otherwise you're just doing one-offs, changing, and you're basically doing Metroplex closer into the airport.
All over again.
So we did Metroplex up high,
Yeah.
change those routes. Now you're talking about redoing everything inside the local area here. And you can't move one without moving another,
But I believe it sits around quantity design also, right? There's a design around how airspace is built. But,
Well, no, yeah, it's around routes, yes, and there's so many competing factors.
right.
And
It's a lot.
it's all law, it's all public law, and everybody gets to weigh in on what Class B airspace looks like.
So Lydia, I actually heard your question a little bit different. You could interpret it as, here, let's start, with a blank slate.
Yeah.
That's not what I heard you say, was, is the airport feel empowered and charged that says, here, we need to go find a solution to this problem, and if we're gonna go try and find a solution, make sure we're talking to everybody else. But, so that's what I was interpreting you to say. And I think I'm not gonna ask Matthew this, but I'm not sure that the San Jose Airport believes it is their charter to go fix the air route stuff. I think the airports in general, if the airport has an operational issue, I'll just say, if they're gonna look to a solution, they would make sure they talk to the other airports and the FAA to make sure they're not creating other operational issues. So I think, I would just say, I think the airports, if they see something where they need to make a change, they are coordinating regionally, because they know they can't just do something themselves. To your first part, it says here, they think they're charged with doing that specifically for this issue. I'm kind of gonna guess is no. That's my word.
Yeah, well, okay, I can understand that. It's just that it's such a big issue that is gonna be going on for years, and not to kind of start looking at how to do something, that is at system level with everybody involved. When I say everybody, it's all the other airports involved. Then it's just kind of like saying, okay, maybe 25 years down the line, we're gonna have to revisit all this again. Yeah, I mean, population's not gonna stop growing, commerce is not gonna stop growing. So, how do we, not only resolve some of the issues that we're faced today, but also down the line. So I guess that's not something we can answer today. But if I could just add one more, is as we're going through all of this, I hope that we're gonna be monitoring and measuring what we implement, what is today's noise and impacts, and what is gonna be later on as, once things are implemented, whichever procedure is implemented. Hope there's a measurement there so that we can gather the data in order to refine.
So that begs a question to the FAA. When somebody in the FAA is doing an environmental report, if they were going to have to do one for something going forward right now, what would they use as baseline information in terms of ground level noise?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, do you have anything else?
No, thank you. Is that
Lisa?
something that we can that I don't know is kind of scary? Is that something that we can kind of like
Oh, yeah.
try to discuss?
Well, that's why I just stopped, because I wrote that, I think that's a pretty big question, I wrote that one down.
That's
It's,
right.
I don't know,
Well,
because we're air traffic.
the environmental, that's what I said, the
Environmental.
environmental office, those
Can
are
answer
good
that.
questions, and we'll get those
So
questions to them.
that's why I stopped, because I had to write it down, and I didn't want to scribble that one.
Now, we
Thank
don't
you.
know, but someone will be able to answer your
Okay,
question.
I'm done,
Please.
thanks.
Yeah, so you started out earlier this meeting saying, I want to get back to, at some point, saying, what should we be asking? And I think that's a really good question. I kind of feel like, I know I am not the expert on airplane noise, FAA, airport operations, or anything else. I'm desperately trying to come up to speed. I'm very thankful there's a lot of residents who have jumped into this topic to help us. But I guess I'm kind of wondering and a little bit frustrated that, you guys are the experts, and how can we tap into this to have you help us come up with solutions
Well,
that we probably aren't going to think of them all.
as I did mention in the last time we met, if I had that answer in the pocket, I wouldn't leave it there. I really wouldn't. There's no reason for me to. It's not jumping out at us, let's put it that way. The solution to all of this is not something that is right there on the cuff and we're just ignoring it. It isn't something that we know about because it's too difficult to get to. It's not something that is we know about because it's too expensive to deal with. Honestly, Dan's working multiple airports, multiple procedures. She's doing this stuff for a living, day in and day out. She has worked with multiple noise committees throughout Northern California, and those answers just are not that simple to come by.
But would you add anything to our list right now to say, you ought to also put this down as something we should look at or consider?
Definitely.
I would add a charted visual flight procedure to your list.
Sorry, what did you say?
A charted visual flight procedure. So instead of just saying clear visual approach, that it's an opportunity for you to have dispersion, to have now short of the system approach, which I do agree, I don't know if we can get there. And so I would disagree a little bit, then I think you have to do short term and I think you have to do long term, but I would ask for that.
Sure.
You said a little while ago that you could, on a particular track, you can get all the data. And what I'm curious about here is, over a particular track or something real close, you're going to see one airplane noisier than another, for example. Are you able to get cockpit data, informational stuff? I don't think you can, but I'm asking a question.
No, as a matter of fact, it's interesting because I was just reading a news article in the San Jose Mercury, I think it was, because of the close calls at San Francisco and a few other airports across the country, that 3 congressmen are now looking for a special committee to look into that and actually to try to get cockpit recording information. So that's something the FAA doesn't have.
That's not data that's now recorded, I should say, either.
It's nothing that we
It's
have.
from the airline.
The airline has it.
The airline has it then?
Well, the airplane has the data.
No, not like, for example, the angle of rotation of the wheel.
The cockpit recorder.
That's all
It's on the
cockpit.
black
Gas
box.
and so forth. Is
Oh,
that all
it's in the
part of it?
plane.
They have it, but it's private data right now.
It's private data until there's an event,
Mhm.
that then the
NTSB.
NTSB, they have full rights to it.
Is this something that might help us understand the behavioral differences of 2 airplanes, one noisy, one not, over essentially the same route?
I think if you, like, we pose the question, you guys are gonna give us maybe a couple of comparison examples to look at, we might be able to tell there.
Okay.
I mean, all I can say is we're gonna go back, we can, like Tony mentioned, we'll listen to the recording of the air traffic controllers, which might tell us what the pilot asked
I
for,
can
what
see
was
how you get the
issued.
data, but I didn't know if you could see their data.
We won't see theirs, but we're gonna offer you what our recording equipment is giving and what our data displays are giving on radar. All those things we'll have available, but we can't get what's actually going on in the airplane other than what's being transmitted back to air traffic.
Thank you.
Sir?
Just a couple thoughts or comments. I'm an engineer too, and I like the idea of looking at things from a high level. But I'm also a council member. I know we only have so much time, and so I wonder if there's anything we can do for the limited scope, limited time, and zero money available, right, for the next few weeks that will help people like you that clearly otherwise you wouldn't be sitting there on a Friday afternoon having a problem, right? And I'm not an expert either. I'm interested in learning from folks like you. And there's, 10, 15 in the room that probably know a lot more about what's going on than me. So I encourage you strongly, help us, right, with ideas. And it has to be realistic, right? And it has to be something we as this team can ask for on your behalf, right? This is how we can help you over the next few weeks. And then we're gone again, right? What I don't know, not being an expert either, is are there any experts out there other than the ones sitting in the room here that maybe we could invite one or two as a guest to come think a little bit outside the box with us? Maybe someone from an airline, right, that is flying and using it, and see how they see the world, right? Maybe there is someone out there that just. And I agree, I don't like ideas that we can't just do it, right? Those are killers, right? There's always an option, right?
Yeah,
I just have to find it.
I would actually encourage you through the airport to get some chief pilots to come here from the airlines that fly in here and get their perspective and listen to them on what they're doing in the cockpit. Mayor Waldeck, you mentioned, can we get a recording? Well, perhaps you could just get it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and you can talk to some of these folks and find out what they're dealing with as they're flying the airplane in here.
I very much would love that, and there might be in-house here people that we don't know. And if I could ask them, hey, if money and time and nothing would matter, what is the crazy idea you would like us to pursue? To disrupt maybe everything that's happening right now, and it might not happen this year, but maybe 10 years from now, right? And so I don't think you will get the answers definitely not from me. I'm not an expert, but maybe from someone in the room or someone we haven't even invited yet. And I think that we can do within the plan.
Yeah. I would just go ahead and I would say, talk about the time frame. I'm not envisioning that the time frame that our questions go out to and we get all the responses back in that same time, and the 5 months or 6 months we're locked on. Because some of the research of if there are actual procedure changes or something that FAA is going to look at, those things take much longer time for reasons. So not all our questions don't have to be, you get back to us in the remaining 2 months or 3 months that we have. I want to go back to Mary Lynn. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I had a question about, and I'm sorry because I can't identify people by name, because I haven't been able to connect the voices with what I'm hearing. But the individual that talked about going back to the visual approach, I believe that's one of the experts is it from TRACON or from FAA? Okay.
That was Dan from the FAA about taking a look at creating a chartered visual flight procedure.
And no, then after that there was a woman who spoke about the visual approach, and I couldn't hear everything. What my question has to do with visual approach is since we have airlines that determine that the instrument landings and visual approaches, do they have the ability to occur, and will TRACON go along with visual approaches? That's the question there. And I had one comment going back to putting in a second flight path. We had a real problem with that with the select committee, so I definitely prefer the word dispersion. And I just wanted to iterate that I have that on my list. And then secondly, yes, smooth descent is OPD, and I would like to see what we can do to pursue that. But I understand that given the different types of aircraft and the different certifications of the pilot, that's going to be a problem. So I actually, in answer to the last person who said, could we get pilots in, after I finished seeing on the select committee, I've had pilots come up who recognize me from the select committee, and they said to me, thank you, thank you, thank you. We prefer OPD. You can't believe the maneuvers, the back and forth, the back and forth, the back and forth that we've been using to stay within Class B to hit what the FAA was saying we had to hit. So those two things are the two things that I'm looking at, dispersion and OPD, and then a better understanding of what the legislature, so again, a woman talking about visual approach, and how that would play out.
Okay, well, the people in the room, everybody's kind of looking in their eyes like, we're not sure who that was, so I'm not sure we can get a direct answer to that.
I think she thinks Than is a man.
No.
Than is a woman.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
So why don't we have Dan explain what a charted visual approach is, other than a charter, but so you get the terminology right. And then she can explain that and how it could possibly benefit.
Dan, you're up.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
You are the one. Yes.
All right. So I recommended a charted visual flight procedure because if we kind of spoke about how some airlines, if we just say clear visual approach, they will fly an instrument approach path anyway, and they'll have a mandate to do that. Versus if there is a charted visual, that means it actually has an approach plate. It is also in the cockpit. It's in the FMS. You can use waypoints. You don't have to use waypoints, but now you can use waypoints. And it can be slightly offset, or we can maneuver it. We can put it in slightly a different spot where you would have your RNAV flight path, and now you would have your charted visual flight path, and that could build in some dispersion. Also, charted visuals can have higher altitudes. The TERPs, the criteria for building a visual approach is slightly less strict than building an instrument approach, so aircraft can be slightly higher. And it may or may not help, but it gets you that other thing about where you were talking about, instead of at 4,000, maybe we could be at or above 4,000 and give the pilot a little bit of that leeway, and a charted visual does that. We, of course, will still have restrictions where we have aircraft that we have to separate from. We're going to, of course, have to separate. But it does give us other leeway, and it's definitely something, as a group, I would ask us to look at for you.
Thank you.
Okay, so then, now I can put multiple asterisks by that one. The other thing I would just remind people that, in theory, when the winds are going this direction, people typically say that was during storms, which I'm not sure we can do visual flight stuff when it's that aspect of it, when it's rainy and all that other kind of stuff.
Around 1-2 tends to not always be just a cloudy approach. The weather isn't always bad. Actually, wind is the main driver, and the skies are sometimes clearer.
So this is actually, I was going to get to this later. So to San Jose Airport, they did provide, in the last meeting they provided before, information about number of flights, that are happening annually. Actually, they showed it by month. They've shown percentages of what percentage is being flown during south flow. And when you look over, it's not a direct trend that says here it's just been going up straight kind of thing. There are years where it goes down. This is, here, we all say it's caused by global warming or not. But it's also changed. Again, it used to be, I've lived here in the Bay Area for 5+ decades, and more south flow, and the house I've lived in has primarily been under south flow. That's how long I've seen this. It used to be mostly during bad weather. Now we're seeing the winds change, on beautiful summer sunny days. It used to be the south flow winds happened in the afternoons. Now we're seeing them happen first thing in the morning. And if you ask the people at the airport, the number of flights that happen between 7 and 8 is much higher than happen between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. The impact of what people are going to see on the ground, because they're still in bed at 7 o'clock in the morning, is different than between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. So there are lots of factors that go into this of what goes on with those. I'm going to go ahead and I have two more speakers who wanted to, because I want to go ahead and take as many ideas as we're here right now. So we're going to kind of open back the community piece. So Jennifer L. Sorry, I'm going out of turn here.
Sorry, yeah, it's me again. Just a couple of things. The role of airports, I think, has changed because of the next-gen system. Before, when procedures were developed, airports did not have a seat at the table. We found that out with Phoenix. When they had a working group to revise a procedure, it had all the stakeholders, and it turned out that the community was not a stakeholder, and the airports were not stakeholders. So they did a study sponsored by the FAA, and they had a lessons learned. And as a result, the airports now do have a seat at the table for developing procedures. So that's a huge role, and I don't think we should underestimate that. And so to Councilmember Lydia Cruz's question, airports should be talking because of that new role. The other thing I wanted to mention is that it's great, you know, this is not the situation here, but in our area, for example, the visuals can only work on the weather, of course, or some things can work whenever possible. In planning for the future, we just never know what the needs are going to be. So at the end of the day, some of these auto procedures are going to be really important to design, because whenever possible, it could be never, or it could be not enough to relieve people. So I just wanted to point that out. OPD is kind of, the first thing that Glenn Martin said when he was here during the select committee meetings is, OPD is not quiet. That's right. And so we've got to be really careful about the glide and the slide and all of that, because everything depends on where you are. Lastly, I don't want to take away the punchline from the people from the environmental group, but the ADT model, you can actually put all the flight tracks on a given day, however many they are, and model those. So it's not just one flight track. And that can be further calibrated. So when all of that works out, you'll really have a better picture of how that works. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to try to Mary
Shovelin.
There you go.
Yeah, two comments. Number one, I really want to emphasize the importance of the dispersion, and I wasn't here earlier, and I apologize if I missed some of the conversation, but you know, the biggest issue is the issue of everything going down now this one railroad track. And we've said over and over again, it's just a nightmare for people that live under that. And it's really, it's not acceptable as a person under that. It's oppressive. And so whatever happens, there has got to be a consideration of dispersion, because you know, you can't, that's been the uproar in the whole country, is when everything started going down in this railroad path, and if that isn't changed, we're going to keep having the same problem. The other thing is, I just want to comment when at the meeting in December, I'm sorry, he's your superior, I do forget his name, but he indicated that there is an opportunity to let go of some efficiency for the sake of meeting some of the goals of this group. And I think that is really important to keep in mind, because there's got to be some flexibility here. We all know that pure efficiency, everything monitored on one path, you know, as one result. And so flight complaints can fly higher. I mean, what are all the ways we can reduce the noise? And it just cannot be going down the same path, every plane, so that those people that are under it are constantly impacted. Thank you.
So, to Dan, FAA, I kind of want to take Lisa's questions here and kind of try and probe a little bit more about possible areas, and not specific things as saying a charted visual flight approach, but there are a lot of parameters of the complex airspace. And one I keep coming back to is San Francisco comes so far south. Safety is obviously a parameter that we want to go ahead and tackle. So are there, and I believe that it's the parameters which has gotten us to where we are today, for good and for bad. You know, I think you guys in the procedure world, you're asked to hear somebody wants to try and do something, and you go, okay, well, what are my constraints of how to do that? So if I'm trying to, so from a systems perspective, I go, here, I'm going to change the constraints. We know San Francisco airspace coming south is a constraint. We know wind is a constraint. What would be, and there's probably 95 of them, but what are other big constraints that play into the equation a lot? Does that make sense as a question? You know, if we were trying to look at things we could adjust so that if we gave you a different set of constraints, which is what people are saying about if we relook at the Metroplex, you come up with a different answer. Not that we can necessarily change these, but what are the big factors that really impact how you put together a procedure the most? And we'll caveat you know, you're off the hook if you miss something or, I don't want to hold you a bit. So wind is a factor, glide slope, San Francisco airspace. What other kind of things really play into the procedures you put together?
Volume. I mean, one of our biggest, for us, from our perspective, the volume of aircraft dictate very much how we have to design. Because if we knew that there wasn't going to be conflicting, we could use the same altitude for two different airports. It used to be, San Francisco used to actually have periods where it would be really busy, and we could kind of plan for that. And it seems to be busy all the time, and we actually used to try to share some of the routes into San Francisco. We would share them, and now they're saturated. So volume is a huge one, and scheduling, and that is of course something we don't have any control over. But when all your departures want to leave all the airports at the exact same time, we have to stack them, and stuff gets down low and they can't climb out and get out of the way fast. And the same thing if they all arrive at the same time. We are going to have to stack them, and we're going to have to level them up, and we can't let them descend on those OPDs. So
it's not just traffic, it's the consistency of traffic.
Yeah. So a comment was made a little earlier from the public that San Francisco traffic was actually less from one year to the next. Well, San Francisco traffic right now during the wintertime, which is always slower months for all of the airports, is averaging 1,250 operations a day, every day. During the summer, they're averaging 1,450 operations a day. Actually hit a 1,550 operation last year, and which is the highest they'd ever seen ever count at that airport. So to put that in perspective, each operation is an arrival and a departure, so that's 2. Airplane lands, airplane takes off, that's 2. So it's at least over 600 airplanes every day that are landing at San Francisco, and over 600 airplanes that are taking off every day from San Francisco. And that's during their slow times. And so Delta has stated that they are going to be increasing the number of flights that they have going in and out of San Francisco on a daily basis. And the carriers there are actually ramping up their operations rather than slowing them down. And we're at a point of saturation that we're working with San Francisco on a regular basis to try to reduce their ground delays and gate availability. We actually are trying to work with them to understand when a gate will be available and when it won't. And when it won't, we have to tell the TRACON far enough out so that we can line them up for 28 right versus left, because there's no ground to hold these airplanes at. And so we try to keep them to the right side or the bay side of the airport so that we can hold them on the ground somewhere waiting for their gate to open up. So it's not getting less, it is getting more. And I think there was an article recently that came out about San Jose, and it's the fastest growing airport in air carrier airport in the nation. So this is something that's ramping up. And when Dan says it is consistent, we're seeing 35 arrivals every hour that are going into San Francisco. So yeah, those lulls aren't there. I worked it for many years, and the radar, and you have those periods where you could actually, as a supervisor, plan your lunches, because there weren't going to be any airplanes coming during this hour, and you knew that that it would build up again the following hour, so you get as many people out as you can to have their lunch break, so that you can get them all back in the control room in time to get the next busy slot.
So, again, a question to Dan, and this one may be unfair. Given the topic of what we're trying to do and stuff, what are the things we should have asked you that we haven't asked you?
Oh, that's a good question.
I am trying to brainstorm. I do think I would ask for us to also look at the east side. Even though I know that I've kind of looked at that and it's problematic, and it's worth asking, why couldn't we build an arrival that is over the east, that's over the hills there? And maybe environmentally that would pass, and that's not my, so I'm only speaking from my perspective.
These are ideas, we're not, I guarantee you, nobody's gonna say, Stan said that, so we have to.
I know, but you're going to put it in writing and give it to us, and I'm going to give it back to Ben.
It's going to have a question mark on the end.
But I would take a look at the east, because even if we split those, and again, that falls into the dispersion, it also could relieve, and someone even spoke to it from the audience, talking about, at some point, we have this 10,000, I've reached my maximum, you're killing me, now we offload to the east. But that is something that could be doable, that we, if we could build that procedure and have it separated. And part of the problem with that, I'm just going to warn you, is that those hills are turbulent. And we have complaints from users if we get them too low. We are trying to do that with Surf Area in San Carlos right now, and it does cause turbulence over those hills. And so aircraft may have to be higher, and if they have to be higher, then all of a sudden we have San Fran again. So it's like that dang San Fran keeps popping up. But it's worth looking at. That would be one thing I would say to look at. I would look at where do you want, tell us where, if they have to do the U-turn, if they are on the west side, tell us where you really want them. Where do you want them to turn base? Where do you want them? In your perfect world, tell us, give us, we want them here, or we want them here in our descending order. This is where we really want them, and then go on down. Or do you want them close? I mean, is farther away worse than, tell us, because some of that was designed for efficiency. It really was. The RMP was, part of it was designed for efficiency. Is it the best? I don't know. Tell us where we want it.
The concept behind the select committee, which has been brought up a few times, is that you brought representatives from all the different areas in to tell the FAA where not in my backyard kind of concept, they tell us whose backyard to put it in. And so I think that you have the same concept here, and you guys discussed it on the first meeting. It's like, okay, so we can't tell you we're going to move it over into your backyard from your backyard. But you guys can tell us, move it into my backyard from your backyard. We still have to go through the environmental process no matter what we do, but we're working from a perspective that the community as a whole wants us to look at. And so you're never going to have 100% buy-in from your community, individual community, people within them, but at least we have a starting point to actually work from. And it's not something we're coming up with, it's you're telling us where to put the airplane and can it be here. So that's the best concept that we can work off of.
Mary Lynn, do you have any other thoughts or questions, comments?
None.
To my colleagues here.
I had a thought, Glenn. We're surrounded by technology companies, and we have a very limited budget. Our cities have, we're all on austerity budgets right now. I was wondering if there is some way that we can incorporate a company like maybe Google, for instance. They offer their employees opportunities to develop software, different work on projects that that they're interested in. Could we use some of these technology companies to help us, like maybe with the noise monitoring, for instance. You know, I know they've come up with great applications on our phones, you know, that we can download, but to create something that, you know, physical, you know, that can be placed in the community, you know, in the flight path, you know, that we're talking about. I mean, I'm looking at the flight path from SJC taking off and going right over my neighborhood, and I'm just amazed at the decibel levels, you know, as the plane is taking off. I mean, literally right over my house. And so I'm just thinking, you know, can we, you know, bring in somebody to help us out since we are on a very limited budget?
So trying to think how I write that down. I think if we were able to identify we wanted to create this kind of deliverable or we wanted to create that kind of deliverable, and we understood what that was, then we could get to, okay, well, if we don't have the budget for us, where might we go to get it? So I think that would be a better way to try and look at it, is what's a deliverable, you know, we might want to see out of the process or that we need, and then we could go, if we, you know, at least articulated the deliverable, then we can go, how would we get it, as opposed to going, how would we use this massive resource, but we're not sure what the deliverable is we want them to do. So if you could send me a note, I'm going to wrap up with these are not the end all of what it's going to be. If we could define a deliverable, I think that would be easier to go, okay, how do we create the deliverable? As opposed to, we have lots of resources, we think we want them to do something.
Okay, thank you. I will.
Anything else from my colleagues here? Okay, so I'm going to try and get into wrap-up mode of what this is. I have taken a bunch of notes here, and really it falls into two categories. One is what is the kind of list of possible mitigations of what we've got, and all things are equal there. And then the other one is a specific set of asks that we want to have, specific questions to the FAA for our next meeting of what goes on. My intent is I will try and put this together. I'll probably pass it back and forth once or twice here to see if I've missed anything. And then we'll go ahead and we're going to blast both those lists out to everybody who's a part of this group. And also, we all, I think us as my colleagues, we all know who the community groups are behind us, and if we've got our own websites and things like that to try and get this list out. With then the intent, I would think, hopefully the FAA would be able to come back to the next meeting and be able to answer a bunch of the stuff that we asked. And then, you know, part two of that would be being able to take what our list is of possible mitigations. And I'd like to go ahead and try and see if we could, not necessarily force rank them exactly, but here, this is category A, category B, category C, in terms of maybe we look at them here, what's achievable possibly in the short term, what are things that we might like better. There might be a couple different vectors that we put on it, so that we could then probably say, coming out of that, here, this is our priority mitigations, that then we could talk to the FAA or the airport or whoever else about if we have item 1 and item 2 and item 3, how do we go about doing that? You know, could we just ask the FAA, here, can you look at a procedure for a charted visual flight approach, or do we have to go through this thing where we write up, you know, what exactly you need to initiate some of these things? So it's kind of, what is the whole list, how do we prioritize, and then how do we get towards initiation of what those things are? Does that make sense? Is a way forward? So in the interest of, I think here in my meeting, I usually have an end item where anybody from the public wants to give any last comments of things that we haven't already talked about. Is there anybody from the public that you want to say anything to us? See, there was something going down. I'm just trying, while we are here, let's give everybody a chance to speak.
I'd just be very brief. To amplify one of the last comments that was made is, I think in the end, the way out is through. And here we are in Silicon Valley, we have some of the best technical minds on the planet. I think it would be good for the committee to start to collect ideas for technical programs that ought to be fast-tracked. and they may not provide us any relief in 5 years, but they might provide us relief in 10, or 7 if we fast track them. And I would just suggest that we go down that path, and part of our work product include ideas that may help longer term, which should be funded at a higher level than are now.
Okay? Sure, go ahead.
I want to make sure that my words are not misinterpreted. When I say start from scratch, yes, that's the concept. However, I'm sure there are some good routes that function today, so you don't have to scrap everything and get rid of them. But I think I want to highlight the comment that Mr. DiBernardo made earlier. He said, yeah, we did a Metroplex design at 30,000 feet. And now basically you're asking us to do a Metroplex design near the airport. And I say, yeah, that's exactly what we need, because that's where the people live. I couldn't care less what's happening at 30,000 feet. Yes, you can do all the efficiency you want for the Metroplex at 30,000 feet, but where the people live, you need to pay attention. So I think there are ways to go between what we have today versus completely changing the Metroplex near the airport. There are some good routes that work, over the bay, over the ocean, etc., at high altitudes. There is, an FAA kind of standard in the environmental assessment that any flight that's a arrival flight below 7,000 feet, they do not consider this as a noise nuisance to people. I can even give you the link. That's documented everywhere. So there are some good practices. So if you can make flight arrive at over 7,000 feet over residential areas, you are halfway there.
Yeah. Any other comments from my colleagues? Sure.
It's an announcement. Is it part of this? May I?
Go ahead, Matt. I don't know what you're going to announce, but go
Well,
ahead.
it's actually about the National League of Cities convention that is taking place March 10th to the 14th at DC. And I was just wondering if any of the council members are going to this National League of Cities convention, because there is going to be an airplane noise component there, a group meeting, and we could certainly be much more powerful if more cities are attending this together than just one city by one city. So I'm just hoping that if any of you are going, that we connect up and we attend these meetings together, and even go advocate at the Capitol, which they have a date set, that we can do it together.
I'm actually not going, but our vice mayor is who's the alternate to this. So, maybe everybody could, we'll find out who's going and who's not.
That would be great. I mean, if you guys can kind of let us know.
Okay, I had, before I take my wrapping comments, I did say our next meeting is March 9th. To my colleagues here, do you guys prefer we meet in San Jose or here?
Here.
Here. There you go. That was a resounding, I thought that might be the case. So we'll head. Oh, and you want to go ahead and tell me?
If you didn't get parking, I'll have it available right here after.
Okay. So first off, I thought this was a very good meeting. I want to thank the public who came and spoke, thank my colleagues and stuff. I want to thank the FAA. Regardless of our initial starting point of where we had today, I think you brought exactly the right expert into the room. Stan, I want to thank you for coming.
Yes.
I've not met you before, but I've heard your name. I know you were working on other issues that are related to airspace around us. I'm not going to say what it is and stuff, but we very much thank you, because I know you're doing a lot of hard work there, so thank you very much. And I really think you have been able to speak in our terminology or our language, this mystical stuff that happens in the FAA's airspace, or what you guys do. So thank you very much. I have already restated what we're going to do. I'm going to document this stuff out. We'll get it to everybody and spread around. I think kind of the next meeting should be about trying to see FAA responses of stuff, and then prioritization and grouping of what are possible mitigations. And mitigation is the word I always use. I don't know that we're going to be able to get to quote solutions and stuff, but I think we're really looking for ways to mitigate the impact of ground noise. And so with that, not seeing anybody else want to speak, we're done at 4:09.